Ever wondered what secrets lie beneath the ocean, hidden for centuries? Welcome to Timeless Secrets, where we explore sunken treasures, forgotten cities, and relics lost to time. If you enjoy these mysteries, please subscribe and like, and tell us where you're watching from and the time there. The coins that slept beneath waves. Beneath the steady wash of the Mediterranean, where the light of the sun filters down in muted beams, lies the harbor of Caesarea. For centuries, it has rested there, a blend of ruins and stonework, its pillars worn smooth, its arches broken by storms, its pathways hidden beneath shifting sand. The sea sways over it like a heavy blanket, and within its depths, in pockets untouched by time, coins lie sleeping. They glimmer faintly when caught by drifting rays of sunlight, each one a fragment of memory, each one a whisper of the people who once held them. The harbor itself was once a marvel, built by Herod the Great 2,000 years ago. It was carved with ambition, the first of its kind, to dare to tame the open sea. Stones were laid upon stones, massive blocks of concrete and volcanic ash pressed into the waves, forming walls against the waters. Ships entered carrying silk, spices, oil, and glass. The air would have smelled of tar, salt, and smoke. Sailors' voices rose in many languages, some bargaining, others singing, others calling across the decks. But storms came, as storms always do, and the harbor did not last forever. Its walls broke, its towers crumbled, its docks disappeared beneath the restless waves. What survived slipped silently to the seabed, amphorae with fractured necks, anchors left buried in silt, and coins that sank unnoticed into the folds of sand. Over time, the sea covered them with its endless patience, folding them deeper and deeper until they became part of its secret tapestry. It was centuries later that divers, searching not for treasure but for traces of history, stumbled upon them. The currents had shifted after a winter storm, rolling sand back like a curtain, and there in the shallow waters, not far from where tourists now walk along the old aqueducts, lay a scatter of gold coins. The sea had polished them, but their shapes remained clear, their markings legible, their beauty undeniable. Each coin was of gold, gleaming in the filtered light. The faces carved upon them told of emperors long gone, rulers who commanded fleets, who raised taxes, who sat upon thrones and signed decrees that altered the lives of millions. These were coins of the Fatimid Caliphate, struck between the 10th and 11th centuries, when power shifted hands between Cairo, Jerusalem, and Damascus. Their Arabic inscriptions spoke of caliphs whose names still linger in history books, though the sound of their voices has long since faded. Imagine the moment they slipped into the sea. Perhaps they were carried on a merchant vessel, locked inside a wooden chest, the payment for goods that never reached their buyers. Perhaps the ship struck rocks near the harbor mouth. Or perhaps it was caught in a sudden gale, its sails tearing, its planks splitting as water rushed in. The chest might have tumbled into the waves, its lid bursting open, scattering the coins into the current. The sailors may have shouted, clinging to rigging or clutching planks of wood, while below, unnoticed, the treasure drifted downward. The sea is a keeper of such stories. It does not hurry, it takes what is given, and wraps it in silence. Fish swam past the gold, curious for a moment, before moving on. Seagrass waved over the coins, concealing them inch by inch, season by season, until only the seabed knew they were there. When divers first recovered them, the coins were startling in their condition. Unlike iron, unlike bronze, gold does not corrode easily. These coins had lain for nearly 1,000 years in the sea, yet they shone almost as brightly as the day they were struck. Their edges were sharp, their inscriptions crisp. One could still read the words proclaiming faith, leadership, and authority. Some bore the name of Caliph el-Hakim, the enigmatic ruler, whose reign was both celebrated and feared. Others bore the names of different rulers, telling of decades and dynasties. To hold one of these coins is to touch time itself. The weight is small, but the meaning is immense. Imagine the hand of a merchant, sweaty from the heat of a crowded market, holding the same coin before passing it to another. Imagine the pouch tied to a belt, jingling as its owner hurried through a bustling port. Imagine the last person who touched it before it fell into the sea, perhaps unaware that their grip would be the last, that no human hand would feel it again until the modern age. The discovery did not come all at once. Divers returned again and again, each time finding more. Dozens of coins became hundreds, and the seabed revealed its secret more fully. They were scattered in clumps, as if spilled in a single catastrophe. Some were wedged between rocks, others lay nestled in sandbanks, others tangled among the remnants of pottery shards. All told, nearly 2,000 coins were brought up from the sea, each one a fragment of a vanished world. The coins now rest in museums where lights shine upon them and glass cases protect them. Visitors lean in close, eyes narrowing to study the inscriptions, mouths whispering questions about the people who minted them. Children press their faces to the glass, marveling at their brightness. Scholars study them, tracing the patterns of trade. the roots of ships, the reach of empires. Yet no matter how carefully they are displayed, they still seem to belong to the sea. Their gleam carries with it the shimmer of underwater light, the hush of currents, the cool silence of the depths. They are relics of two worlds, the world of men who struck and spent them, and the world of waves that claimed and guarded them. And if one listens closely, if one imagines the sound of water lapping against stone, the echo of footsteps on the harbor long ago, it is possible to hear the whisper of those coins, not in words but in presence. They remind us that time moves forward, but not everything is lost. Some things wait, hidden, patient, sleeping beneath waves until the moment comes when they will be seen again. The harbor of Caesarea still lies there, its stones uneven, its columns broken, its walls mostly collapsed. Fish dart through what was once a grand entryway. Seaweed clings to stairways that once bustled with workers. The aqueduct stretches along the beach, weathered yet proud, and beneath it all, unseen to most, the memory of coins lingers. The sea holds many secrets, but sometimes it chooses to let them go, offering them back to us like dreams returned from slumber. The coins that slept beneath waves carry no single story, no single answer. They are fragments, shining questions pulled from the depths. Who lost them? Why did they fall? What lives were changed in that moment of loss? No one can know for certain, yet perhaps it is enough simply to know that they were there, waiting, and that now they are here again, glinting softly, reminders of both the fragility of human endeavor and the enduring patience of the sea. And so they rest again, this time not in the dark folds of sand, but beneath the watchful eyes of those who wander past their glass cases. They shine, they whisper, they tell without telling. They are coins that once moved through busy hands, then lay quiet for 1,000 years, and now gleam once more, treasures that the sea kept, and treasures that the sea returned. The city that drowned in silence. Beneath the shallow green waters of the Mediterranean, where the Nile River meets the sea, there lies a city that once bustled with voices, markets, temples, and ships. Heraklion, also called Thonis by the Greeks, stood for centuries as a gateway to Egypt, a shining threshold between river and sea. It was a place of arrivals and departures, where merchants hauled goods from the decks of ships, where priests carried offerings into great temples, where rulers collected taxes and decrees were carved into stone. And then, without warning, the city sank. Its avenues vanished into silt, its temples drowned beneath waves, its voices silenced. For over 1,000 years, Heraklion was lost, known only through scattered inscriptions and forgotten fragments of memory. The rediscovery of Heraklion is one of the great underwater tales of archaeology. For centuries, scholars debated whether the city was real or a myth. Ancient texts spoke of it. Herodotus mentioned a place called Thonis, where the legendary Helen of Troy and Paris once landed on their way to Troy. Later inscriptions referenced its harbors, its role in trade, its temples to gods like Khonsu and Amun. But no one could find it. Maps gave no trace. Travelers saw no ruins. It was as though the sea itself had swallowed the name. And then in the year 2000, divers working off the coast of Alexandria, led by archaeologist Frank Godillo, uncovered its remains. At first there were only scattered stones, weathered blocks that looked like the skeleton of something once immense. But as the sand shifted, as sonar traced hidden outlines, the city revealed itself. Colossal statues emerged from the depths. A red granite figure of Hapi, the god of the Nile, his face calm and serene, though worn by centuries of currents. A temple wall lay toppled, its hieroglyphs faint but still present. Bronze coins glimmered faintly among shells. Pottery and ritual vessels rested in the seabed, as if placed there yesterday. Imagine the city as it was before the silence. Ships approached from across the Mediterranean, their sails heavy with wind, their decks laden with olive oil, wine, cedar wood, grain, papyrus, and exotic goods. The harbor stretched wide, capable of holding countless vessels. Docks extended like arms, and men hurried along them, shouting in Greek, in Egyptian, in the many tongues of trade. The scent of fish and tar mingled with incense drifting from nearby temples. Pilgrims disembarked, carrying offerings, climbing steps toward shrines. Priests stood in white linen robes, chanting as they poured libations into basins. At the heart of Heraklion rose the great temple of Amun-Gareb. Here the god was honored as protector of Egypt's kingship, and rituals bound pharaohs to divine power. Inscriptions speak of sacred processions where barks carrying the image of Amun drifted along canals, guided by priests while crowds lined the banks, watching the shimmering reflection of God in flame. The temple's courtyards rang with drums, sistrums, and chants that echoed between columns. The city thrived on water. Canals cut through its streets like veins, lined with stone embankments. Barges and smaller boats moved constantly, ferrying goods and people. Houses rose along the banks, their walls painted, their courtyards filled with jars of grain and oil. Markets crowded with stalls selling spices, fabrics, fish, and carved amulets. Foreigners mixed with locals, their clothes and accents marking them out, yet blending into the rhythm of trade. Heracleion was not merely Egyptian, it was international, a port of exchange where the Mediterranean world touched the Nile. And yet beneath its busy surface, the city stood on fragile ground. The delta was unstable, a patchwork of clay and sand. The Nile deposited silt year after year, shifting the earth beneath foundations. Earthquakes shook the region, storms lashed its harbors. Slowly, cracks appeared, walls tilted, canals clogged with sediment, temples sank ever so slightly. The people patched, repaired, reinforced, but water always finds its way. Then came the catastrophe. No one can say exactly when, only that it happened between the 2nd and 8th centuries AD. Perhaps it was an earthquake, a sudden convulsion that shattered supports and toppled pillars. Perhaps it was liquefaction, when the wet soil beneath the city turned suddenly to fluid, swallowing buildings whole. Or perhaps it was storm and flood combined, the sea surging against weakened structures, dragging streets beneath waves. However it came, it was swift. Whole sections of the city dropped, houses collapsed, temples cracked, canals overflowed with silt. People must have fled in boats, their cries lost to the roar of water, and then silence fell. The silence lasted more than 1,000 years. Fishermen sailed above it without knowing. Storms stirred the seabed, burying fragments deeper. Stories of Heracleion and Thonis passed into the realm of myth, half believed, half forgotten. Only faint inscriptions in remote temples still carried the name. When modern divers descended, the silence met them first. No sound but the hiss of their own breathing, the slow ripple of water across stone. Their light swept across broken columns, hieroglyphs half buried in sand, statues leaning as though frozen in mid-fall. It was as if the city had been caught in the moment of drowning, still reaching upward from its bed of mud. Among the ruins, treasures lay waiting, bronze coins and jewelry, preserved in silt, stone anchors dropped by ancient ships, weights and measures from the markets, ritual objects from temples, even fragments of papyrus, sealed in clay jars. The discoveries painted a picture not only of trade, but of ritual life, of politics, of a city where gods and merchants walked the same streets. The colossal statues are among the most haunting. 1. A figure of a queen, rises over 16 feet tall, carved in red granite. Her face, though eroded, still bears a calm majesty, as if watching over her city, even in ruin. Another, of the Nile god Hapo, rests with rounded cheeks and strong limbs, symbol of abundance now lying beneath waves. These statues were too heavy to move far. When the city sank, they sank with it, descending into the seabed, like guardians laid to rest. Divers also uncovered inscriptions that confirmed the city's role. Decrees written in both Greek and Egyptian marked Heracleion as a key port, the place where goods entering Egypt paid their duties. Every shipment passed through here, taxed before entering the Nile's arteries. This was the threshold of an empire, a city whose wealth was tied to the river itself. To walk through Heracleion now, though it is walking in slow motion, with flippers and currents tugging at every move, is to drift through silence broken only by memory. You pass columns lying on their sides, half buried like sleeping giants. You see doorways that lead into sand, streets that end in silt, statues whose eyes are dimmed by algae. Fish dart in and out, indifferent to the human past. The city is not dead, but transformed, a reef of memory, a ruin made into sanctuary for sea life. And yet, despite the silence, there is a presence. The city feels inhabited still, though not by flesh and voice. Its drowned temples seem to hold ritual air, as if the chants of priests still linger faintly. Its canals, though clogged with sand, suggest the echo of barges. Its statues gaze through water as if watching both sea and sky. Heracleion was not erased, only transfigured. The rediscovery has given back more than ruins. It has returned stories to the surface. The coins tell of commerce, of the touch of countless hands. The inscriptions tell of rulers, laws, and divine processions. The statues tell of reverence and devotion. Each artifact whispers part of the city's lost song. And yet, perhaps the truest voice of Heracleion is its silence. A silence that stretched across a millennium, broken only when divers descended with lights and cameras. A silence that speaks of impermanence, of the fragility of even the grandest harbors and temples. A silence that holds in it the weight of time, the patience of water, the inevitability of change. For long after Heracleion sank, other cities rose and fell. Alexandria grew nearby, its lighthouse guiding ships where Heracleion once stood. Empires expanded, empires crumbled, wars raged, dynasties shifted, new ports were built. Yet beneath it all, unmoved, the city of silence lay waiting. Now, in museums and photographs, people gaze upon the colossal statues pulled from the seabed. They marvel at their size, their detail, their endurance. They read the inscriptions, they examine the coins, they imagine the city alive. hear in their minds the voices of sailors and priests. But what lingers most is the awareness that all of it was once gone, utterly hidden, and could have remained so forever. The city that drowned in silence has returned to us, but only partially. Most of it still lies beneath sand and water, unreachable, protected by the sea. What has been found is enough to remind us that even the greatest ports can fall, that even the busiest streets can be swallowed, that silence waits beneath every city, and in that silence, the city still dreams. It dreams of ships with sails like wings, of incense rising from temples, of coins clinking in markets, of voices in many tongues. It dreams of priests carrying statues along canals, of torches flickering in courtyards, of the laughter of children playing by the harbor. These dreams drift through its broken streets, echoing softly, mingling with the currents. Heracleion sleeps still, but it is not forgotten. The silence is not empty, but full of memory, of presence, of lessons. To descend into it is to move not only through water, but through time, into the space where life once thrived and then was hushed. It is to walk in a city that drowned, a city that still breathes in silence. The statue that rose from the sea, beneath the shifting waters of the Adriatic, in a place where sunlight filters down like strands of liquid gold, the sea cradled a secret for nearly 2,000 years. Resting upon the seabed, half buried in silt and shadow, lay the form of a man, not flesh and blood, but bronze, cast in the image of strength and perfection. For centuries, waves broke above him, storms raged, and tides swept across his face, but the figure endured. It would later be called the apoxiomenos, the scraper, a name born from the ancient ritual of athletes cleaning their skin with curved strigils after competition. Yet for the longest time, the sea alone kept him company, hiding him from human eyes until chance or fate brought him back into the world. The story of the statue begins long before the Adriatic claimed it. In ancient Greece, sculptors sought not merely to carve stone or cast metal into human form, but to capture ideals, the beauty of the body, the balance of proportion, and the quiet dignity of motion caught mid-gesture. The apoxiomenos stood among these ideals, a man depicted in the intimate, almost mundane act of scraping oil and dust from his skin. It was not the heroic stance of a warrior, nor the divine bearing of a god, but something far subtler, the celebration of the everyday grace of human life. Yet the artisans who shaped him infused even this small gesture with elegance, turning routine into art and mortal flesh into eternal bronze. To imagine how he came to rest beneath the Adriatic waves, one must step into the currents of the past. Bronze statues were treasures of the ancient world, prized not only for their artistry, but for the sheer value of the metal. Few survived the centuries intact, for conquerors melted them down, recasting them into weapons, coins, or new forms. Those that endured often did so because they were lost, abandoned in shipwrecks, swallowed by soil, or as in the case of the apoxiomenos, surrendered to the sea. Perhaps he was aboard a vessel carrying plunder, a ship heavy with spoils bound for Rome or Constantinople. Perhaps he was a gift sent from one ruler to another, a token of prestige traveling across the Mediterranean routes that tied together empires. But something happened upon that journey. Storm, battle, or accident, that tore the statue from human possession and consigned it to the seabed, where silence became his keeper. For nearly 2 millennia, the Adriatic wrapped him in stillness. Fish darted past his limbs, algae curled around his base, and barnacles crept across the bronze. The sea, in its strange patience, preserved him. The salt and shifting sands might have corroded his features into obscurity, yet somehow he remained whole, as if the waters themselves chose to guard him. He lay undisturbed, unseen, until the late 20th century, when a diver exploring the coast near Lochin, Croatia, glimpsed an outline that was not stone, not coral, but unmistakably human. What must it have felt like in that moment, to hover underwater, the air tank hissing softly, and see a face gazing back through the murk? A face not alive yet lifelike, waiting across centuries for someone to notice. The recovery of the apoxiomenos was delicate. Lifting a bronze statue that had spent centuries submerged is no simple matter. The sea becomes both protector and destroyer. Once exposed to air, the metal can crumble, salt crystals expanding like silent explosions within its structure. Conservators worked with painstaking care, stabilizing the figure, cleaning away the clinging sediment, and slowly revealing the details hidden beneath layers of encrustation. When at last the statue stood upright, free of its watery shroud, the world could see what the sea had preserved. A body of lean strength, balanced in a contrapposto stance. Weight shifted gracefully, one arm extended in the act of scraping, the other relaxed. The features of the face were calm, composed, marked with that timeless serenity of Greek sculpture that seems neither wholly mortal nor divine, but something between. The apoxiomenos belongs to a tradition of sculpture that sought to capture not static forms but moments suspended in time. The Greeks had mastered the art of depicting motion in stillness. The statue leans slightly, as though one could almost see the muscle shifting beneath the bronze, almost hear the scrape of the strigil against oiled skin. It is a paradox of vitality and permanence. The body will never complete its motion, yet it will never cease it either. This eternal in-between is what gives the statue its quiet power, a sense that the figure exists not just as representation, but as presence. Placed in its new home in Croatia, the Apoxiomenos became more than an artifact, it became a bridge. Visitors stand before him and feel the centuries collapse. The act he performs is universal and small, yet immortalized in such detail that one can sense the continuity of humanity across the gulf of time. He is not a god smiting enemies, nor a king commanding subjects, but a man caught in routine, and in that ordinariness lies something profound. The ancients believed in the harmony of body and soul, the importance of training, discipline and beauty, not as vanity but as reflection of inner order. The Apoxiomenos carries that message forward, unspoken but visible, through every contour of his form, and yet the sea still clings to him in memory. For those who know his story, it is impossible to gaze upon the statue without imagining the centuries he spent lying beneath the waves. One can almost hear the muffled hush of the seabed, the slow drift of currents over bronze shoulders, the darkness punctuated only by shafts of light filtering down through clear Adriatic waters. The silence of his long burial lingers, a reminder that every artifact we uncover has endured countless moments of solitude, waiting for rediscovery. What is it that draws us so powerfully to such statues? Perhaps it is the tension between loss and recovery. We know that thousands of such bronzes once existed, adorning temples, theaters, and public squares across Greece and Rome. Almost all are gone, melted into anonymity. Each survivor, then, is not merely an artwork but a miracle of chance. To find one resting intact beneath the sea is to open a window into a world that should have been erased, and to feel the brush of hands long vanished across the surface of enduring metal. The Apoxiomenos is more than a relic. He is a narrative cast in bronze, a tale of human aspiration, of artistry, of survival against time's hunger. His presence is calm, steady, and unchanging, but the story he carries is restless, stretching across centuries of storms, shipwreck, silence, and rediscovery. To look upon him is to feel not only the perfection of form, but the weight of history, the quiet passage of eras, and the gentle persistence of beauty that refuses to vanish. So he stands now, no longer hidden by silt or shadow, but lifted from the seabed into the light of galleries and memory. Yet even as visitors walk past him, whispers of the sea seem to linger. One can imagine him still beneath the waves, a solitary figure resting in silence, waiting for currents to stir, waiting for eyes to find him. And perhaps that is the greatest power of the Apoxiomenos, to remind us that beauty, once created, never truly disappears. It may be buried, forgotten, or drowned in silence, but somewhere, patiently, it waits, ready to rise again from the sea. The scrolls that surfaced from sand and salt. In the desert, silence lingers like a second skin. The wind drifts across barren ridges, carrying grains of salt and sand that whisper against stone. Along the shores of the Dead Sea, where water lies heavy and motionless, thick with minerals, and the land itself seems too stark to sustain memory. Something extraordinary, weighted beneath rock and dust for centuries, in caves carved into cliffs, in jars sealed with care, and hidden away from the eyes of time. Ancient scrolls slept. Their words, once spoken by voices that have long turned to dust, were pressed onto parchment, wrapped against decay, and left where no one was meant to find them. And yet, centuries later, the desert gave them back, the Dead Sea Scrolls, among the most mysterious messages ever to resurface from sand and salt. The story of their discovery begins not with scholars or kings, but with shepherds. In 1947, a young Bedouin boy named Mohammed Ejdib tended goats near Qumran, on the rugged cliffs above the Dead Sea. One of his animals strayed into a cave, and in following it, he tossed a stone through an opening in the rock. Instead of silence, the stone struck something fragile. The sound was unexpected, the sharp crack of pottery breaking in the darkness. Intrigued, he returned with companions, squeezing through the narrow entrance to find tall clay jars, some still sealed, others broken. Inside were bundles of ancient scrolls, leather and parchment darkened with age. The shepherds could not have known what they had stumbled upon. To them, the objects were strange, perhaps worthless, perhaps dangerous. They carried a few away, curious enough to show traders in Bethlehem. From there, the scrolls passed from hand to hand, sold for small sums in markets, handled without gloves, sometimes cut apart or stored carelessly. Yet even in those first uncertain weeks, whispers began to spread. These were not ordinary writings. They bore the marks of extreme age, the script of a people whose voices had long since gone silent. What emerged from the caves of Qumran would come to reshape understanding of history, religion, and the fragile persistence of memory. Over the years that followed, scholars, archaeologists, and fortune seekers scoured the cliffs, crawling into crevices, lowering themselves into shadowed caverns, and recovering fragment after fragment. 11 caves in total yielded manuscripts, some whole, others shattered into thousands of tiny pieces that had to be painstakingly reassembled like puzzles. More than 900 documents were eventually found: biblical texts, sectarian writings, hymns, apocalyptic visions, rules of community life. They had been hidden sometime in the last centuries before the Common Era, preserved by the desert's dryness, the sealed jars, and sheer chance. The jars themselves tell a quieter story. Standing about 2 feet tall, with rounded bodies and thick rims sealed with lids of stone or clay, they were vessels of protection. Whoever placed the scrolls inside knew they held something precious, something worth guarding. Some jars were empty when discovered. Others still contained tightly wrapped scrolls, layered in linen that had once been white but had darkened into shades of brown. Time had cracked the clay, but the desert had done its work well. Parchment that should have turned to powder remained legible. Why were they hidden? That question lingers like an echo across the salt cliffs. One theory suggests a religious sect, perhaps the Essenes, withdrew to the wilderness to live in strict community, copying sacred texts and awaiting divine revelation. When danger loomed, Roman legions marching during the Jewish revolt of the 1st century, they hid their library, sealing it in caves, expecting one day to return. Another possibility is more chaotic. Refugees fleeing war carried what they could, stashing scrolls in secrecy, never to reclaim them. The truth may lie between, or beyond, these explanations. The scrolls themselves remain silent on this question, leaving scholars to weave possibility from fragment and context. Among the most astonishing discoveries were copies of texts familiar to billions today. Books of the Hebrew Bible, preserved 1,000 years older than any previously known manuscript. Side by side with them were writings never seen before: poems, rules, visions of angels and demons, calendars, and interpretations of prophecy. The effect was like opening a door into the religious world of 2,000 years ago, a world both familiar and strange. These were voices at the edge of empires, struggling with questions of purity, law, destiny, and the fate of the world. The caves themselves became part of the mystery. Caves 1 and 4, in particular, yielded extraordinary finds. Cave 1 gave the world the nearly intact Isaiah scroll, a parchment over 7 meters long, preserved almost in its entirety. Reading it, one encounters words that echo across centuries, verses that form part of the foundations of religious tradition. Yet here they stand as they were written long before. Cave 4, by contrast, seemed like a library shattered by time. More than 15,000 fragments emerged from its depths, pieces of about 500 different manuscripts. To work with them was like sifting through broken glass, each shard sharp with meaning but incomplete on its own. Imagine the scholars hunched over tables in dimly lit rooms, fragments spread before them, each tiny scrap carrying letters penned by hands long gone. They used magnifying glasses, photographs, and patient comparison, trying to fit shapes together, reconstructing words, sentences, and entire scrolls. The work was as much archaeology of thought as of object, piecing together not only parchment but the minds and worlds that had produced them. The setting of their hiding place remains unforgettable. The Dead Sea is the lowest place on Earth's surface, a basin of salt water so dense that swimmers float effortlessly upon it. Around its shores, the Judean desert stretches in blinding white cliffs and barren ridges. Heat presses down by day, cold sharpens by night, and the air itself feels ancient. In such a landscape, human life is fragile, yet memory endures. The scrolls, sealed in jars, survived precisely because of this harshness. Had they been hidden in a greener, wetter land, they would have dissolved long ago. Paradoxically, the desert's cruelty became their preservation. Each scroll is a meeting point of craft and devotion. Parchment was made from animal skins, prepared with care. Ink was mixed from carbon and minerals, applied with steady strokes of a reed pen. The script varies, sometimes elegant, sometimes hurried, but always deliberate, each letter laid down with intention. The writers were not merely recording words, they were transmitting belief, law, and vision across generations. When we read them today, we do not only read their content, we see the trace of the hand that moved, the moment of ink touching skin, a gesture made 2,000 years ago. The contents reveal a community deeply concerned with purity, order, and expectation of divine intervention. Texts describe rules for communal living, penalties for disobedience, and visions of an apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Hymns echo with yearning for salvation, laments for corruption, and hope for renewal. Alongside them sit copies of familiar biblical works, copied with care, their words lined with tiny variations that reveal the living, evolving nature of tradition. For scholars of religion and history, these scrolls are windows into the world that shape Judaism and Christianity alike. And yet, beyond scholarship, there is a quieter wonder. Imagine unrolling a parchment that has lain sealed in silence for 2 millennia. Your fingers, gloved for protection, trace letters penned by someone who never imagined your world, your language, your time. The parchment crinkles softly, releasing the faint scent of age, dust, leather, and memory. The words emerge in lines of ink, still dark, still legible. A voice speaks from across the centuries, steady and patient, as though it had only paused for breath, and now resumes. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us of the fragility of human record, and of its endurance. Whole libraries have been lost to fire, conquest, and neglect. Countless works vanished without trace. Yet here, in one of the most inhospitable corners of the earth, words survived. Not because of empire, not because of wealth, but because someone chose to seal them in jars, hide them in caves, and trust the desert to keep them safe. That choice allowed voices that should have vanished to rise again. In museums today, the scrolls rest under glass, in carefully controlled environments where light, humidity, and temperature are kept constant. Visitors move past them in quiet awe, leaning close to read words that crossed millennia. Yet the power of the scrolls is not only in the texts themselves, but in the story of their survival, the way they surfaced from sand and salt, as if the desert decided the time had come to speak again. Scholars still debate their origins, their authors, their exact purpose. The fragments resist certainty, leaving gaps that can never be filled. But perhaps this incompleteness is part of their mystery. They are not a finished book, bound and whole, but a chorus of voices broken and scattered, yet still resonant. The silence of the caves mingles with the whispers of ink, reminding us that history is never entirely known, never entirely secure, but always fragile, waiting to be found. When you picture them, sealed jars hidden in shadow, parchment rolled tight, waiting centuries in stillness, it is hard not to imagine intention. Did the people who hid them believe they would one day be read again? Or did they hide them as a final act, a gesture of preservation in the face of loss, never expecting return? Either way, their decision bridged time, allowing us to glimpse not only words but lives. Scribes bent over parchment, communities wrestling with faith and fear, generations passing in expectation of what was to come. The Dead Sea Caves remain, carved into limestone, overlooking the salt waters. Tourists now walk where shepherds once stumbled, but even as footsteps echo across the rock, one can feel the weight of silence, the memory of jars resting in darkness, the scrolls waiting in their fragile stillness. They are not merely artifacts. They are reminders that words endure beyond the breath that speaks them, that memory hides in unlikely places, and that even in the most barren landscapes, something waits to rise again from sand and salt. The God who slept in the bay. The sea around Greece has always been a keeper of secrets. Beneath its shifting waves lie fragments of ships, cargoes of forgotten trade, and sometimes figures of gods themselves. Along the northern edge of the island of Euboea, near Cape Artemision, the waters conceal one such secret, until, by chance and storm, it rose again. A colossal bronze figure, cast in the 5th century before our era, waited for centuries in silence. When it surfaced, it stunned the world, the Poseidon, or Zeus, of Cape Artemision, a god that had slept in the bay for more than 2,000 years. Imagine the sea at that place. Winds sweep across the cape, turning the water to white foam. The horizon stretches into blue haze, while below, the seabed slopes into darkness. Fishermen had long known that the waters hid dangers, reefs that caught wooden hulls, storms that dashed vessels against stone, but they did not know that in those depths a god was waiting, his bronze arms stretched wide, as though commanding the waves themselves. The discovery came in the 1920s, when storms shifted the seabed, and divers searching for shipwrecks came upon something extraordinary. First, fragments of horses appeared, bronze hooves, pieces of manes, scattered in the sand. Then slowly, the great figure emerged. At over 2 meters tall, the statue depicts a bearded god, powerful and composed, striding forward with one foot, one arm stretched outward, the other raised behind him. The hand once held a weapon, either a thunderbolt, if it is Zeus, or a trident, if it is Poseidon. The weapon is gone, leaving mystery. But the power of the stance remains. Even stripped of his emblem, the god dominates. The bronze statue dates from around 4060 BCE, the early classical period of Greek art. It is one of the very few surviving large-scale bronzes from antiquity. Most were melted down over the centuries, their metal reused for weapons, tools, or new works. That this one survived at all is because it was lost at sea, taken by ship from one place to another, but never reaching its destination. Instead, it sank, entombed in salt and sand, where it lay until modern divers brought it to light. Bronze casting in ancient Greece was a feat of both art and engineering. The lost wax technique allowed sculptors to model figures with extraordinary detail and dynamism. A clay core was shaped, covered with wax, then encased in more clay. When the whole was heated, the wax melted out, leaving a cavity into which molten bronze was poured. The result was a hollow yet powerful figure, lighter than stone yet seemingly alive. The Poseidon of Artemision embodies this mastery. Muscles ripple across chest and arms, the beard curls with texture, the pose balances tension and grace. The god strides forward, eternal in bronze. When the statue was lifted from the sea, coated in marine incrustations, the world glimpsed not just an artifact, but a survivor. Conservators carefully cleaned away centuries of salt and shell, revealing the smooth surfaces beneath. The eyes were once inlaid with bone or ivory and glass, now gone, leaving dark hollows. Yet even empty, the gaze commands. Stand before the statue today, in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, and you feel its presence. It is not merely a statue. It is a force, still resonant with the power of sea and storm. The question of identity lingers. Is it Poseidon, lord of the sea, holding a trident that would have stretched outward in command? Or is it Zeus, king of gods, hurling his thunderbolt? Scholars debate, tracing clues in gesture, in balance, in ancient references. The arm is extended in a throwing motion. A trident, long and thin, would have been difficult to attach securely. A thunderbolt, shorter, fits more plausibly. And yet the sea gave him back, and so Poseidon seems fitting. Perhaps the ambiguity itself is part of the power. Whether Zeus or Poseidon, the statue is divine authority made form. Think of the ship that carried him. It sailed the Aegean in a time when city-states flourished, when temples rose on hilltops, when gods were honored with sacrifices and festivals. The statue may have been destined for a sanctuary, a gift of victory, or an offering at a shrine. Perhaps it was being transported from one city to another as war booty, or as diplomatic tribute. But a storm rose, winds tore sails, waves struck, and the ship went down. The bronze god sank into silence, lying among shattered timbers, his weapon lost, his horses scattered. For centuries he remained there, visited only by fish, his bronze slowly acquiring the patina of the sea. The sea preserves differently than earth. Where soil and sand press close, water erodes and encrusts, but also protects from fire, from smelting, from looting. And so the god slept, untouched by empire and conquest. Rome came and went, Byzantium rose and fell, Crusaders marched, Ottomans ruled, modern nations emerged. Still he waited, unseen, beneath the shifting surface of the bay. Only in the 20th century, with modern diving equipment, could humans reach him again. To gaze upon the statue now is to feel both awe and unease. Awe at the artistry, the balance of anatomy and motion, the sense that the figure is not frozen but alive, about to strike. Unease at the thought of the centuries it lay hidden, at the reminder that the sea holds countless other secrets, some never to be found. The god who slept in the bay is both a miracle of survival and a symbol of all that is lost. In the museum, light falls softly across his bronze shoulders. Visitors walk around him, circling slowly, craning upward at the stretched arm, leaning close to trace the lines of beard and chest. Children stare wide-eyed, scholars sketch or take notes, but always there is the feeling that one stands in the presence of something more than human craft. The ancients believed their gods could inhabit statues, that offerings and prayers could make the divine dwell in bronze or stone. Looking at Artemison's god, it is easy to understand why. The surface bears marks of the sea, tiny pits, traces of encrustation, faint discolorations from salt. These imperfections do not mar him, they deepen his story. They tell of centuries in darkness, of silence and pressure, of currents sweeping sand across his form. He is not simply a statue lifted from a workshop. He is a traveler, marked by time and sea, a survivor who carries his exile upon his skin. Stories ripple outward from his rediscovery. Divers describe the eerie sight of a god emerging from murk, limbs stretched as though still commanding the water around him. Fishermen recall legends of strange shapes glimpsed beneath the waves, of storms breaking suddenly near the cape. Scholars weave theories about his origin, his maker, his intended destination. Each layer adds to the sense of mystery, the sense that this god belongs not only to antiquity, but also to the sea that held him. When you imagine him, remember that he once gleamed, freshly cast, polished, and inlaid. The bronze would have shone golden in the sun. The eyes would have gleamed white, the lips perhaps tinted, the hair darkened with pitch or enamel. He would not have been the dark green patinated figure we know, but a dazzling presence, meant to impress mortals and honor gods. Now, stripped of such adornment, he speaks with another kind of power, the power of endurance, of silence, of survival. In him one sees the paradox of the ancient world. So much has been lost, paintings, libraries, cities, Yet here, by chance, by accident, something of extraordinary power remains. The god of Artemision reminds us that the past is not entirely gone, that fragments resurface, carrying whispers across centuries. He is not only a relic of Greek art, he is a reminder that beneath the waves, in places of silence, the past still waits, and so, when you think of him, think not only of museums and scholars, but of the bay itself, the wind over the water, the surge of waves against the cape, the shadows beneath the surface. Somewhere down there, for centuries, a god lay hidden, his weapon gone, his body intact, his gaze eternal. The sea kept him, and then, when it chose, gave him back. The god who slept in the bay continues to stride forward, forever frozen, forever moving, a figure of power and silence returned from the deep. The marble face that waited underwater. Beneath the restless waters of the Aegean Sea, where sunlight drifts in wavering columns and silence holds the echoes of forgotten centuries, a face once rested in shadow. It was not the face of a living diver, nor the fleeting image of a sailor peering into the blue, but the marble visage of an ancient statue, a fragment of something greater, carved by hands long vanished and left to wait in darkness. The island of Antikythera lies quietly between Crete and the Peloponnese, its cliffs battered by wind, its shores marked by stories of storms. For generations fishermen had passed those waters, dragging their nets across the depths, never suspecting that beneath them, beneath sand and coral and centuries of quiet sediment, lay the pieces of a city's memory. Among those fragments, half buried and half dreaming, was the marble head, serene, broken, and yet strangely alive, as though it had never ceased watching. When one imagines marble beneath the sea, one might think it would dissolve into nothing, ground down by waves and tides. Yet this face endured, its nose chipped, its lips softened by salt, its curls of hair encrusted with barnacles. But the expression remained. A look of calm strength lingered across the cheeks, as though the sculptor had breathed some eternal stillness into the stone. Generations passed above, empires rose and crumbled, but the statue remained, waiting in silence, where light seldom reached. The sea has a way of making time seem infinite. Every ripple carries the memory of storms, every current folds the centuries into one continuous drift. To dive into such depths is to leave behind the clamor of the world, to enter a place where human voices vanish. There, amid the soundless weight of water, the marble head rested, not alone, but among shattered amphorae, corroded anchors, splintered planks of a shipwreck that had once carried it across the waves. That ship had sailed nearly 2,000 years earlier, its timbers creaking beneath the burden of treasures. It carried bronzes and marbles, vases painted with scenes of gods and heroes, jewelry meant for nobles, coins meant for kings. Perhaps it was bound for Rome, that voracious collector of the world's wonders, or perhaps it sailed to a closer shore, to be displayed in some grand villa. But the sea had other designs. A storm rose, or perhaps the vessel struck the jagged rocks that lurk beneath Antikythera's cliffs. In an instant, wealth became ruin, and the ocean claimed what had been meant for human eyes. Centuries later, in the quiet of the early 20th century, sponge divers stumbled upon the wreck. Their nets had led them near the island, and when one descended into the depths, he expected only sponges clinging to rock. Instead, he found himself surrounded by statues, arms reaching upward, torsos draped in the folds of ancient stone garments, bronzes green with centuries of corrosion. Among them was the marble head, staring out from the sand as though waiting for recognition. The diver returned to the surface, breathless and shaken, speaking of a pile of corpses. For in the dim light beneath the sea, the statues had seemed not like art, but like drowned men, frozen in the moment of their last breath. The marble face was brought up into the daylight for the first time in almost 2 millennia. Salt water dripped from its features. Sunlight touched its eyes once more, and for a moment it seemed to blink against the brightness. Those who handled it must have felt a chill, not only from the cold of the sea, but from the uncanny sensation that they were touching a ghost. Here was a fragment of the past, not preserved in texts or memory, but in stone itself, carried through time by accident, by disaster, by the quiet patience of the ocean. In the stillness of a museum, the marble head rests now under careful light. Visitors walk past, their footsteps echoing softly, their whispers brushing the air. Some stop, gaze into the eyes, and feel a stirring, a sense that this is more than stone, more than artifact. The sculptor had carved not just a face, but a presence, and across 20 centuries that presence endures. The lips slightly parted hint at breath. The gaze, though blind, suggests awareness. To some it feels as though the statue remembers the ship that carried it, the men who loaded it aboard, the storm that tore it down, the seabed where it slumbered, and even now the eyes of those who study it. There is a strange power in such fragments. Unlike whole statues, polished and restored, a broken piece seems to contain mystery. What did the rest look like? What story did it tell when complete? Was this head part of a god, a hero, or some forgotten mortal immortalized in marble? Each possibility lingers, like a dream half remembered upon waking, and in that uncertainty lies the beauty, the endless invitation to imagine. The marble face is not alone in its silence. Around it, other treasures from the Antikythera wreck whisper their own stories. A bronze youth, his muscles frozen in tension. A horse, rearing eternally without a rider. Amphorae still sealed with the remnants of wine and oil. And hidden within the wreck, discovered only later, the strange mechanism, gears locked in corrosion, yet revealing, when studied, an ancient machine that charted the heavens. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be called, was perhaps the most remarkable relic of all, a glimpse into knowledge thought lost. But even beside it, the marble head held its own quiet mystery. Machines speak of science, of calculation. Statues speak of presence, of the human longing to capture life itself. Imagine for a moment the sculptor who carved the face. Perhaps he lived in Athens, or Rhodes, or some island workshop. He took up his chisel, worked slowly across the marble, coaxing out cheekbones, eyelids, lips. He gave the stone its expression, calm, dignified, slightly otherworldly. Did he imagine that his work would survive storms and centuries, to be found beneath the sea by men who lived in a world he could not dream of? Or did he simply carve, intent only on the moment, never knowing the future he was shaping? Time stretches long, and human lives are short. The marble face reminds us that the two are not always bound together. For though the sculptor's name is lost, his work breathes still. Though the ship's crew drowned, the cargo remains. Though the city that bought or sold the statue has crumbled, its art survives. And the sea, in all its silence, has been the unlikely guardian of memory. Beneath the blue, where sunlight fades into shadow, countless other relics may yet wait. Faces, arms, vessels, anchors, fragments of worlds long past, waiting for the day when chance will bring them once more to the surface. The marble head of Antikythera is but one such relic, yet in its gaze lies the weight of centuries. It reminds us that silence too can be a kind of storytelling, the long patience of the ocean, holding history in its depths until we are ready to listen. And so it rests, a face without a name, a fragment without a body, a watcher without eyes. The marble that waited underwater carries more than the memory of a storm. It carries the echo of human hands, the breath of forgotten sculptors, the unbroken thread between then and now. And as long as we look upon it, we become part of its story too, the latest in a line of countless gazes, stretching back through time and forward into futures yet unknown. The sea has always been a keeper of secrets. For every vessel that sails across its surface, there are others that never return. For every city that thrives along its shore, there are fragments it has swallowed whole. The marble face of Antikythera belonged to this hidden archive, a library of stone and salt where words are not written but carved and drowned, waiting for rediscovery. To gaze upon it is to listen not only to what it shows, but also to the vast silence it carries. When the divers first brought up fragments from the wreck, it was with a kind of awe mixed with fear. They were men of the sea, accustomed to storms and hunger, but not to the weight of centuries pressing upward from the depths. They wrapped the statues carefully, as though afraid the stone itself might crumble into dust at the touch of air. In their hands, the marble head seemed less like a work of art than an apparition, a reminder that beneath the waves, time does not simply pass. It pools, it deepens, it gathers itself into quiet reservoirs. Scholars gathered, examining each detail of the recovered relics. The marble face bore the marks of a skilled hand, the soft hollow beneath the eyes, the subtle curve of lips that seemed prepared to speak. Some suggested it was Apollo, the god of light and order, his likeness captured in stone. Others whispered it might be a mortal prince, honored with divine beauty. But the truth remained elusive. With only a head to study, the body lost to the sea, the story remained broken, like a sentence cut short in mid-breath. And yet perhaps that was its power. The missing pieces drew imagination into the gaps, forcing those who gazed upon it to supply their own endings. Was it once part of a grand temple statue, towering over worshippers? Or was it a modest household guardian, watching silently from a courtyard garden? Each possibility expanded the story, weaving countless invisible threads into the silence of the stone. The Antikythera wreck itself was no ordinary loss. It was not a simple cargo ship carrying grain or wine. The artifacts recovered suggested a vessel of immense wealth, a floating gallery of treasures. The bronzes alone, athletes, horses, deities, spoke of a collection meant for the elite. Some historians imagined a Roman general returning home with spoils of conquest, a victory made tangible in stone and bronze. Others suggested wealthy patrons of Greece, sending gifts across the sea to curry favor with the empire. Whatever the truth, The cargo represented not just value in gold or marble, but value in memory, objects that embodied the highest skills of their age. And the Marblehead, small though it seemed among such riches, carried its own quiet command. For unlike gold or jewels, it did not glitter, it simply endured. It endured storms that splintered wood, salt that corroded metal, centuries of pressure and silence. And when it was finally raised into the daylight again, its calm expression remained unbroken, as though it had simply closed its eyes for a very long sleep. There is something dreamlike in imagining the statue resting beneath the sea. Picture it lying on its side, half covered in sand, surrounded by schools of fish weaving through amphora handles, crabs crawling across bronze limbs, seaweed swaying gently over collapsed timbers. Sunlight would rarely touch it, only on days when the sea was calm and the water clear. At night, moonlight filtered faintly from above, no more than a pale shimmer, and so the marble face learned patience. Decades became centuries. Centuries became millennia. Whole languages were born and forgotten above the surface, but below, the statue remained in place, its stillness deeper than any human silence. What is it, one wonders, that makes us so captivated by faces carved in stone? Perhaps it is the recognition, the illusion that marble can carry emotion, that chisels can breathe life into unbreathing matter. We gaze into eyes that cannot see and feel seen. We trace the curve of lips that cannot move and feel spoken to. The marble head of Antikythera belongs to this mystery, a fragment of humanity frozen in time, carried across ages not by memory but by accident, by misfortune, by the impartial hand of the sea. Yet even in misfortune, there is preservation. Had the ship arrived safely, the statue might have been displayed in a villa, gazed upon for a generation or two, then lost to fire or conquest. Instead, the wreck buried it in silence, delivering it to us intact across 2,000 years. Disaster became its salvation. The waves, which once seemed to steal it, became its guardians. In museums today, where climate control hums softly and lights glow with steady warmth, the marble head rests as though it belongs to this new kind of silence. Visitors pause before it, unaware of how much distance they bridge in that single gaze. Children see only a strange, beautiful face. Scholars see centuries of style and technique. Dreamers see the sea itself reflected in the calm of those lips, the serenity of those blind eyes. And perhaps if one stands long enough, one begins to sense something more, not knowledge, not explanation, but presence. A reminder that time does not always destroy, sometimes it preserves. The Antikythera head belongs to no single story. It is Greek in form, Roman in context, global in its journey, universal in its silence. It belonged once to a shipwreck, then to the sea, then to the hands of divers who could not comprehend what they had touched. Now it belongs to us, and yet not entirely, for no one truly owns such a relic. It is older than our nations, older than our languages. It carries in its marble veins the patience of centuries, a patience no human lifetime can match. Imagine again the sculptor, hammer and chisel in hand. His workshop smelled of dust and oil, the light falling across the white surface of uncut marble. Around him, apprentices worked, shaping smaller pieces, fetching tools, mixing wax for polishing. He struck carefully, each blow releasing what had been hidden in the stone. Slowly, a face emerged. Perhaps he spoke to it as he worked, as sculptors often did, coaxing life from silence. Perhaps he saw in its features a reflection of someone he knew, or of an ideal he carried in his heart. When the work was done, he stepped back, wiped sweat from his brow, and felt a moment of triumph. Yet he could not have imagined that this face, once wrapped and loaded onto a ship, would travel not just across seas, but across centuries, to be rediscovered by hands so far removed from his own. And so the marble face continues to live, not in breath, but in memory. Its story is told again and again, each telling layering new meaning onto its ancient silence. It is a reminder that art does not die with its maker, that beauty can endure even when everything else is lost. Beneath the sea, it waited. On the surface, it speaks again, not in words, but in stillness, the most enduring language of all. The ship that carried gold to the deep. The waves of the Florida Straits roll gently even now, their rhythm as old as time itself, though beneath their surface lies a memory that changed the course of empires and whispered into the silence of centuries. Ships have always sailed across these waters, some triumphant, some broken, but few carried with them the sheer weight of promise, ambition, and gold, as did the vessel known as the Nuestra Señora de Atocha. To speak of her is to drift into a world of shimmering riches, of prayers whispered against storms, and of treasures that, once swallowed by the sea, seemed as though they would never again belong to men. The Atocha was no ordinary ship. She belonged to the grand Spanish treasure fleet, that sprawling armada which ferried the wealth of the New World back to the coffers of Spain. In the early 17th century, when Spain still dreamed of dominion across oceans and continents, such fleets were lifelines of power. They bore silver from Potosis mines in Bolivia, emeralds glittering from Colombian riverbeds, gold hammered into bars and coins from across the colonies, and even the rare jewels cut to perfection for noble hands. The Atocha, launched in 1620 and named for a holy shrine in Madrid, the Virgin of Atocha, was tasked with carrying a fortune fit not only to finance kings, but to remind the world that Spain's reach was gilded by heaven's favor itself. But fortune is never carried lightly across seas. The Atocha joined the 1622 fleet, a gathering of vessels bound from Havana to Spain. Each year, such fleets set sail in summer, mindful of storms but unwilling to delay, for the empire depended on their cargo. The Atocha was laden to the brim. Silver bars stacked high, gold coins pressed into chests, pearls harvested by divers from Caribbean waters, emeralds that gleamed with green fire even in torchlight. The manifests tell us of thousands of silver ingots carefully marked and registered, for Spain taxed even treasure, and officials were strict in their accounting. Yet, as every sailor knew, the manifests never told the whole truth. Hidden stashes always slipped aboard, private hoards of merchants and captains alike, unregistered, concealed within crates or beneath planks, meant to escape the taxman's notice. The Atocha, by all measures, was heavy with wealth beyond comprehension. She set out in September 1622, joined by sister ships Santa Margarita, Nuestra Señora del Rosario, and others, forming a fleet both impressive and vulnerable. For the seas did not bend to kings. Just 2 days after departure, on September 6th, a hurricane barreled into the straits, its winds violent, its seas towering. The Atocha, slow and overloaded, was no match for such fury. Her masts snapped, her sails tore apart, and she was driven helplessly onto reefs near the Marquesas Keys. The hull shattered against coral, the waves swallowing men and treasure alike. Nearly all aboard perished, over 260 souls, with only a handful of sailors and slaves clinging to debris and surviving to tell the tale. When dawn came, the Atocha was gone, scattered across the seafloor, buried beneath reef and sand. Spain's officials, desperate to recover the fortune, launched frantic salvage attempts. Divers, most of them enslaved Africans forced into perilous underwater labor, descended with crude equipment, holding their breath as they pried at wreckage. Some silver bars were retrieved, along with fragments of cargo, but the bulk of the treasure had slipped into channels too deep and too treacherous for the technology of the day. The Atocha lay beyond reach, her riches turning from royal asset to ghostly legend. For centuries, stories lingered in Havana taverns and Spanish archives alike. Sailors muttered of the lost Atocha, of coins and gold bars lying untouched on the ocean floor. Maps were copied, hints passed down, but the sea held her secrets well. Hurricanes came and went. Sand shifted, coral grew. The Atocha became part of the seabed, a myth wrapped in salt and silence. It was not until the 20th century that her name once again leapt into life. A man named Mel Fisher, an adventurer, diver, and dreamer, heard the call of the Atocha. Fisher was no ordinary fortune seeker. He had a tenacity that matched the stubbornness of the sea itself. Beginning in the 1960s, he and his team of divers scoured the Florida Keys, poring over records, studying currents, dragging magnetometers across the seabed in search of iron traces. Day after day, year after year, they searched, and for 16 long years, they endured false leads, storms, exhaustion, and even tragedy, the death of Fisher's son Dirk, his daughter-in-law, and another diver in a salvage accident. Many urged him to give up, to let the sea keep its claim, yet Fisher pressed on, repeating his mantra, "Today's the day," and one day it was. On July 20th, 1985, Fisher's team struck upon a field of treasure that defied imagination. Glinting beneath the sand were silver bars stamped with Spanish seals, chains of pure gold, emeralds larger than a man's thumb, and coins stacked as if waiting for the hand of a king. The Atocha had awakened. Centuries of silence had ended, and the treasure of Spain's empire shimmered once more in sunlight. The discovery was not simply material. It was a reconnection to history itself. The Atocha's cargo told stories of miners who had sweated in Andean shafts, hauling silver under the lash, of merchants who had bargained in the bustling ports of Cartagena, of enslaved divers who had risked lungs and life for pearls, of sailors who had crossed oceans with prayers in their mouths and storms on their heels. Every artifact was a voice, carried across centuries. The legal battles that followed were as fierce as any storm. The state of Florida sought claim, arguing that the wreck lay in its waters. Spain too asserted rights, for the treasure was once hers, yet courts eventually ruled in Fisher's favor, granting him ownership of the find. The value was staggering, over $400 million in gold, silver, and jewels. But beyond price, the Atocha had become a symbol of endurance. of dreams pursued against all odds, of history surfacing where least expected. Among the most dazzling finds were the emeralds, likely from the Muzo mines of Colombia. Their deep green color seemed almost unnatural, as if the earth had conjured them from its heart. Some were faceted, others raw, and a few of extraordinary size. One emerald, nearly 77 carats, gleamed with such intensity it was christened the Atocha star. Then there were the coins. Silver reals struck in Spanish mints across the colonies, each bearing the pillars and waves design of the era, each carrying marks that told of its origin. Bars of silver, over 1,000 pounds recovered, bore the touch marks of assayers in Potosi. And gold chains, delicate and yet unbroken, lay coiled as if still waiting to adorn a neck at some long-past royal court. The wreck site itself told another tale. Artifacts lay strewn across miles, carried by currents and storms. Cannons, anchors, ship's fittings, all testified to the chaos of the wreck. Even personal items surfaced. Beads, tools, weapons, rosaries clasped by sailors in their final moments. Each object carried human weight. The treasure was dazzling, but it was the silence around it that deepened the story. This was not just a fortune lost and found. It was a grave, a memorial to those who never saw land again. And so the Atocha rests between legend and reality. Though much treasure has been recovered, divers still whisper of portions yet unfound, of cargo holds still buried in shifting sands. The sea does not easily surrender. Perhaps more waits below, beyond reach, a reminder that history always holds something back. But in telling her story, one drifts deeper into the waters of imagination. Picture the Atocha in her prime, sails billowing, crew bustling, treasure secured in her hold, the captain pacing the deck, scanning horizons, knowing storms could rise at any moment. Below, sailors crowded into hammocks, some murmuring prayers to the Virgin of Atocha herself. In the cargo hold, silver bars stacked neatly, gold coins sealed in chests, pearls in sacks, emeralds wrapped in cloth, each object the end of a journey begun in mountains, rivers and mines, each destined for the palaces of Madrid. Then picture the night of the storm, the wind howling like a beast, waves smashing the hull, men shouting orders no one could hear, the creak of timbers breaking apart, the sudden blackness as the sea poured in, the moment when the ship was no longer a vessel, but a coffin. In that silence, centuries later, divers brushed away sand to touch what had lain waiting all along. The coins, when raised, gleamed as if freshly minted. The gold chains caught sunlight, as though they had been woven yesterday. Yet they were voices of another age, echoes of men long gone. As the tale unfolds slowly, as waves continue to lap against the Florida Keys, one feels how history and ocean blend. The Atocha was both tragedy and triumph, loss and rediscovery. Her name now belongs not just to Spain's empire, but to the enduring imagination of humankind. For the sea may take, but it also preserves, and in the quiet of its depths it waits, keeping treasures safe, until the day someone dares to listen, to search, to find. And so when you hear the ocean's murmur at night, think of the Atocha, of the gold that gleams in darkness, of the coins that rest where silence is deepest. They remind us that stories are treasures too, carried forward, rediscovered, shining again after centuries of sleep. The cross that sank with faith. The sea around Hispaniola is not always loud. At times, it breathes with a gentleness that makes one forget it is also capable of breaking wood, of swallowing sails, of holding memories for centuries at a depth where no light reaches. And somewhere beneath those waters, near the northern coast of Haiti, lies what remains of a vessel whose name every schoolchild once learned, though her timbers today are little more than shadows beneath shifting sands. She was called the Santa Maria, and though she was not the grandest of ships, her story clings tightly to the beginning of an age that reshaped the earth. She carried with her not only men and hopes but also faith, and when she sank, she seemed to carry part of that faith into silence, leaving behind relics that whisper across centuries. The year was 1492, and Europe was restless. Empires dreamed of oceans, though most still feared the breadth of the unknown. To sail westward from Spain, into waters unmapped, was an act bordering on madness, but also on divine inspiration, or so it was claimed. Christopher Columbus, Genoese navigator and dreamer, had convinced monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella to grant him ships, men, and blessing. He promised a route to Asia, a quicker path to spices and riches. The crown promised titles and honors if he succeeded. And so 3 ships were chosen, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. The Santa Maria was the largest of the 3, though she was no giant, barely over 60 feet in length, a simple carrack meant for trade, not conquest. She was sturdy but not swift, built in Galicia, Spain, under the name La Gallega. Her timbers were seasoned oak, her beams stout, her rigging fitted with square sails meant to catch the Atlantic's unpredictable winds. She was a merchant ship pressed into service of discovery, transformed into a vessel that would unknowingly carry with it the first crossing of oceans that would bind continents together forever after. When she departed from Palos de la Frontera in August 1492, she carried with her not just provisions of bread, wine, salted meat, and beans, but also symbols of the faith that sanctified the voyage. A wooden cross stood at her stern, visible above the deck, a reminder that each wave was crossed under heaven's watch. Rosaries hung from sailors' belts. Small shrines to the Virgin Mary were kept in corners below deck. Faith was not merely ornament, it was lifeline, comfort against fears of endless waters and unseen monsters. Weeks turned into months. The ocean stretched endlessly, horizon after horizon, the men growing weary, some mutinous. The smaller, faster Pinta often surged ahead, while the Niña darted like a nervous bird, but it was the Santa Maria that bore Columbus himself, his cabin fitted with charts and compasses, his eyes always searching for signs of land. On October 12th, when land finally rose from the sea in the form of the Bahamas, it was the Santa Maria that led, her cross gleaming in the dawn. Faith, it seemed, had been rewarded. From there, the fleet pressed onward through the islands of the Caribbean. They explored Cuba's shores, they glimpsed Hispaniola, and they met peoples who had lived in these lands for countless generations. Trade was attempted, misunderstandings grew, and curiosity mingled with suspicion. All the while, the Santa Maria plowed forward, creaking but steady. Her hold filled not with treasure, but with expectation. It was Christmas Eve, 1492, when fate shifted. The night was calm, but sailors weary from celebration neglected their duties. The helmsman, abandoning his watch, left a boy at the tiller. The ship, heavy and slow, drifted silently until suddenly her hull struck a reef off the coast of Hispaniola. The sound was like thunder under the water, timbers grinding, sails collapsing in confusion. Columbus rushed to deck, but the tide pressed the ship harder against the coral. Water seeped in. The Santa Maria was dying. Through frantic hours, men worked to lighten her load. Cannons were thrown overboard, provisions cast into the sea. Columbus ordered that the mast be cut down to ease the strain, but it was too late. By morning, the Santa Maria lay broken, her belly torn open by reef, her faith nailed to the seafloor. Unlike the Niña and the Pinta, she would never see Spain again. Columbus ordered what could be salvaged to be brought ashore. Timbers were hauled and repurposed into the construction of a small fort on Hispaniola, which he named La Navidad, in honor of the day of her wreck. The cross from the stern was set upright in the earth, as both a marker of faith and a claim of possession, an emblem of heaven and empire intermingled. The men left behind in that fort, the first Europeans to remain in the Americas, were given the charge of guarding what had been saved. Yet, within a year, La Navidad was gone, burned and destroyed, its men killed, its cross toppled, and so the Santa Maria did not simply sink as a ship. She became a ghost of beginnings, a wreck that marked the start of centuries of contact, conquest, exchange, and loss. Her relics, what little remains, are not only of oak and iron, but of prayers, ambitions, and human folly. For centuries, the location of the Santa Maria's wreck was whispered about. Maps from Columbus himself gave hints, though his reckonings of latitude were imperfect, and reefs shifted under waves and storms. Locals in Haiti spoke of timbers buried in sand, of ballast stones glimpsed at low tide, of anchors lost in the shallows. Explorers came and went, each hoping to find the first great relic of the age of discovery. Yet, the sea is not generous with its secrets. In 2014, claims arose that the wreck had finally been located, a scatter of timbers, iron fittings, and stone ballast off Haiti's northern coast. The ship's dimensions seemed to match. The age of the wood fit the right century. The coral growth suggested centuries of rest. There was talk of cannons once seen, since looted, of a hull buried beneath layers of silt. Some declared the Santa Maria had been found at last. Yet debate rages still, for proof in the ocean is slippery. The timbers may belong to another vessel lost in later centuries. But whether or not divers have touched her bones, the story of the Santa Maria's faith remains. Imagine now what it would be to descend into those waters. The sunlight filtering down in shifting beams, touching fragments of coral and scattered stones. You might see the outline of a beam, warped and blackened by centuries, lying half-buried. You might find an iron nail, once driven by a shipwright in Spain, now encrusted with lime. Perhaps even a fragment of cross-shaped wood, the last piece of the emblem that once crowned her stern. Around you, fish drift silently, indifferent to history. The reef grows over what man abandoned, making relics part of the living sea. The cross that sank with her was not merely wood, it was symbol. To her sailors, it was hope when horizons stretched endlessly. To Columbus, it was banner of divine approval. To the crown of Spain, it was mark of empire. To those who later suffered under conquest, it was omen of sorrow. When the sea claimed it, it seemed almost as if heaven itself had withheld judgment, sinking faith into silence where no one could hold it. But the memory of the Santa Maria persists not only in relics. In every telling of the voyage of 1492, her shadow sails again. Her sinking was both loss and beginning, destruction and creation. She reminds us that ships are mortal things, yet the ideas they carry, faith, ambition, hunger, fear, sail onward long after wood has rotted away. Drift with that thought, and the waters of Hades seem gentler. The sea is calm now, but below it, history sleeps. Perhaps divers will one day lift a timber, a nail, or even the very cross itself, though it is more likely that the ocean will keep her secret, and perhaps it is better so. For the Santa Maria does not need to be raised in oak and iron. She already sails in memory, in story, in the quiet current that connects past to present. The cross that sank with faith lies unseen, but it has not disappeared. It waits, like a prayer in water, like a story whispered through waves, and as long as the sea keeps its rhythm, the Santa Maria will never truly be gone. The mirror that reflected in the deep. The waters off the Tuscan coast are blue in a way that conceals more than they reveal. From the surface they glimmer with the sheen of sunlight, calm and endless, but beneath them lie centuries, pressed into the sand, wrapped in silt, and guarded by silence. Fishermen cast their nets there, divers drift through with tanks and masks, yet the sea does not easily surrender the stories it has kept. Sometimes, however, the tide is generous, and a relic rises to remind us that the past is never entirely lost. It was in such waters that a mirror was found, bronze turned dark with age, its polished face dulled by centuries of salt and stone. It was an Etruscan mirror, once bright enough to catch the sun and reflect a face in crisp lines, now a relic half consumed by the sea. And yet, even in its ruin, it held power. For this was not a mirror made only to show a person's likeness. It was a mirror of a people, of a culture that thrived before Rome became Rome. A people whose language whispers to us still, whose beliefs were etched in bronze and buried in tombs, whose artistry traveled across waves. The Etruscans, masters of the land we now call Tuscany, believed that mirrors were more than glass or metal. They were gateways, objects that could bind worlds together. To understand the mirror that rested in the deep, one must return to the world that created it. The Etruscans flourished between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE, long before Roman legions marched as masters of the Mediterranean. They built cities upon hilltops, walled strongholds that overlooked fertile plains and winding rivers. They dug necropolises, cities of the dead, where tombs were filled with goods meant to accompany the soul beyond. They traded across seas, sending their wares to Greece, Carthage, and beyond, receiving in return ideas, luxuries, and myths. Their art was filled with life, bronze figures leaping in motion, painted sarcophagi showing couples reclining as if at eternal feasts, mirrors etched with delicate lines. Mirrors especially carried meaning. Unlike the later Roman practice of glass mirrors backed with metal, Etruscan mirrors were entirely bronze, polished so finely that they gleamed like liquid light. On one side, the reflective surface captured the living face. On the other, artisans carved scenes, myths, gods, heroes, lovers, even inscriptions in their mysterious language. To gaze into such a mirror was to see not just oneself, but to hold in hand a fragment of story, a myth tied to one's reflection. They were personal, intimate objects, yet also sacred, connecting the living to something beyond. The mirror that found its way into the Sea of Tuscany was likely once part of a voyage, perhaps carried in the belongings of a woman of high station, perhaps tucked into a chest as a wedding gift, perhaps offered as part of trade. Ships then were not large, but they carried treasures of immense value. Amphorae of wine and oil, ingots of copper and tin, crafted goods, fine pottery, and sometimes the most personal items of daily life. A mirror such as this might have been wrapped in cloth, kept safe among other possessions, protected against scratches that would mar its glow. But seas are not always kind. A storm could rise suddenly, whipping waves into chaos, turning calm into fury. A vessel caught in such waters might capsize, cargo spilling like stars across the seabed. Perhaps it was such a storm that claimed this mirror, dragging it down to where light does not penetrate. Or perhaps it was a deliberate offering, cast into the sea as gift to gods who ruled wind and tide. The Etruscans, like many ancient peoples, believed in divine forces that demanded respect. The sea, vast and dangerous, was often given tribute, for safe passage was never guaranteed. For centuries, the mirror lay in silence, the sea working upon it. Salt bit at bronze, dulling its shine. Corals and shells clung to its surface. Fish drifted past, indifferent. Sand shifted, burying it, uncovering it again, as though the sea itself breathed it in and out. And when at last divers found it, they did not at first see a mirror at all. It was a disc of darkened metal, edges rough, weight heavy in the hand. Only under careful restoration did its true nature return, lines revealed, figures faint but discernible, a surface once polished, now scarred, but still capable of catching glints of light. The carved side told a story. Perhaps it was Turan, goddess of love, standing with wings outspread, attended by companions. Perhaps it was Hercule, our Hercules, locked in battle with a beast. Or perhaps it was a quiet domestic scene, a reminder that even gods dined and feasted, as men and women did. The Etruscans loved to etch their mirrors with such scenes, blending the divine with the human, making myth a companion to daily life. The mirror from the sea was no different, a tale pressed into bronze, meant to travel with its owner wherever life led. To think of the hand that once held it is to bridge centuries, a woman perhaps, preparing for a festival, gazing into her reflection as she adjusted her veil or traced color upon her lips, or a bride, holding it on her wedding day, a symbol of union and of the future, or even a priestess, gazing not at her face but at omens, using the reflection of light as part of ritual. For mirrors were not merely tools of vanity, they were tools of divination, ways of seeing beyond the ordinary. To catch a reflection was to touch the border between worlds, and when the mirror sank, it carried all of this with it. Its last reflection may have been the sky, broken by waves, then darkness as it plunged. The sea became its keeper, the deep its final temple. For 2,000 years or more, it waited there, its stories untold, until human hands brought it again to air. The Etruscans themselves vanished long before the mirror's rediscovery. By the 3rd century BCE, their cities had fallen under Roman control. Their language, though still visible in inscriptions, was never fully absorbed, and much of it remains unread today. Their gods were adopted by Rome, their artistry imitated, their culture woven into the tapestry of empire. But pieces of them survived, and mirrors are among the most eloquent of these. They carry, in their dual faces, the reflection of both body and spirit, of individual and myth. The Tuscan mirror is more than an artifact. It is a reminder that every object we hold is also a vessel of memory, that what sinks is not always lost, that stories persist in bronze, in salt, in silence. When you picture it resting in the sea, think of the centuries layered upon it, storms passing overhead, fleets of later empires sailing by, wars fought and forgotten, yet beneath it all the mirror enduring, not reflecting faces anymore, but the slow, patient passing of time itself. Close your eyes, and you might imagine it still glowing faintly under the water, catching stray light that filters down, offering it back not as a reflection of the present, but as a memory of the past. The mirror that reflected in the deep continues to reflect, though now what it shows is not our faces, but our connection to those who came before. The anchor that chained the storm. There are places along the coastline of Lebanon where the sea does not merely lap gently against the rocks, but whispers with the weight of millennia. In the shimmer of the Mediterranean, where sunlight pours down like liquid fire upon the waves, the water hides objects that have outlasted empires, dynasties, and kingdoms long forgotten. Among these lies something both unassuming and profound, a stone anchor, heavy with time, silent in its resting place. It once belonged to the Phoenicians, that seafaring people whose very lives were bound to the horizon. It is not gold, nor jewel-encrusted, nor a relic displayed proudly in a king's hall, and yet it carries the dignity of thousands of voyages, countless storms weathered, and prayers whispered by sailors who entrusted their lives to the sea. A simple stone, carved with purpose, smoothed by hands long vanished, and tied with ropes that the sea consumed long ago. It is this anchor that chained the storm, or at least, gave weary sailors the fragile hope that storms might be tamed. As you imagine this object, picture yourself sinking down into the quiet waters of the Mediterranean. The sun above grows dimmer, filtered through blue-green currents. Fish flicker like shadows of forgotten thoughts, darting through shafts of light that descend like pillars from the surface. The seafloor rises slowly, and there, resting as though it had been placed intentionally, lies a stone with a hole carved into its heart. It is heavy, immovable, resting with the patience of centuries. This is the anchor of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were not a single empire carved out by conquest. They were a web of city-states strung along the Levantine coast, each one humming with trade, invention, and ambition. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad, names whispered in texts and myths, places where ships rose like forests of cedar upon the sea. They were merchants, artisans, and navigators, known not for endless armies, but for sails that reached farther than anyone else dared. They stitched together the Mediterranean like a net, carrying goods, languages, and ideas from one shore to another. Their ships cut across the waters like quills, writing history upon waves. But none of that would have been possible without anchors. For an anchor was not merely a tool, it was the sailor's lifeline, the one thing that tethered fragile wooden ships to safety. Imagine for a moment, standing upon a deck as night swallows the horizon. The stars above burn cold, unfamiliar, and you feel the pull of currents beneath. The ship rocks, creaks, and the world feels vast beyond comprehension. The anchor, heavy and sure, is lowered into the water. Rope hisses against wood, and then a thud, A catch, a hold, the ship steadies, the men breathe easier, and the storm, though it rages, seems less powerful when a simple stone keeps you tethered to the earth beneath. It is almost poetic that the Phoenicians, who gave us alphabets and words, trusted their lives to an object so silent. The anchor does not speak, and yet it tells us more about their world than scrolls or ruins. It is the testimony of necessity. They sailed so far, so often, that anchors became as sacred as sails. Without one, a ship was helpless. It drifted, vulnerable, prey to winds and waves. With one, there was the possibility of rest, of stability, of survival. And so the Phoenicians carved anchors from stone. Not all were alike. Some were round, others rectangular, many with a central perforation through which thick ropes could be passed. They were heavy, sometimes hundreds of pounds, and had to be heaved with strength and teamwork. To cast an anchor was to place trust in the sea itself, to offer weight against chaos, and to retrieve it again was to lift from the depths a piece of the earth, binding land and sea together through human ingenuity. One can almost imagine a Phoenician ship upon the waters near Lebanon 3,000 years ago. The cedar planks creak in the salt air. Amphorae of wine, oil, and precious purple dye are stored within. The crew moves about quietly, practiced, their eyes trained upon the horizon. They know the sea is temperamental, calm 1 hour, violent the next. As dusk deepens, the captain calls for the anchor. The men heave it overboard, ropes burning against their palms, until the stone splashes into the darkening sea. The line grows taut, then holds. The ship steadies, pointing gently into the wind, and night drapes itself like a curtain. Somewhere in the silence, a sailor murmurs a prayer to Melkart, protector of Tyre, or to Yam, the god of the sea. The anchor is not just stone, it is faith. Centuries later, long after the rope rotted and the ship itself disintegrated, the anchor remained, patient, unmoving, while empires rose and fell. Assyrians thundered across the Levant. Babylon reached its height, Persia extended its reach, and Alexander carved his conquests into the world. Rome rose, burned, and fell. Still the anchor slept beneath waves, outlasting armies and kings, bound not to human pride but to the permanence of stone. If you lean close to its imagined surface, you might still sense the ghosts of those who touched it. Rough hands, blistered from hauling sails, fingertips cracked from salt and sun, young men learning their first voyage, old sailors remembering their last. All of them pressed their trust into this object, never knowing it would endure as their silent legacy. Unlike the purple cloth that faded, or the wood that rotted, the anchor remained. It waited for us. To call it simple is to miss its weight in history. For what is an anchor, if not the balance between risk and safety? To cast it was to admit one's vulnerability, to surrender to the forces of nature while still holding on to the possibility of survival. To retrieve it was to admit readiness again, to trust in sails and sky. The anchor is not just technology, it is ritual, it is rhythm, it is the heartbeat of seafaring life. The Phoenicians left their anchors across the Mediterranean. They are found in Cyprus, in Greece, in Italy, in North Africa, silent markers of journeys made long ago, each one a breadcrumb of history, telling us where sailors paused, traded, rested, a network of stone across the sea, invisible to those who sailed above, but etched deeply into the seabed, like secret signatures. They remind us that trade routes were not abstract lines on maps but lived realities, measured in sweat, rope, and stone. Think of how many storms an anchor has endured, how many times waves crashed above while it lay undisturbed below, how many times sailors huddled on deck, clutching the sides of their ship, listening to thunder split the heavens, whispering prayers to gods whose names have been lost. All the while, beneath them, the anchor held, the rope strained, stretched, but held. Stone does not argue. Stone does not fear. Stone simply waits. The one found in Lebanon, submerged for centuries, is more than archaeology. It is a bridge to a forgotten heartbeat, lifted into daylight once again, touched by modern divers, placed within a museum's care. It carries with it the hush of all the seas it once knew. Its surface bears scars of wear, grooves where ropes cut deep, edges smoothed by water. And yet, when you look at it, you can almost hear the splash it once made, the thrum of rope pulled taut, the sigh of relief as men lowered their shoulders and let the sea take its weight. Anchors carry metaphor now, long after ships of cedar vanished. We speak of anchors as safety, as grounding, as things that keep us steady when storms rage in our lives. We owe that metaphor to these stones. The Phoenicians did not need poetry to describe them, they only needed them to work. But in their silence, they gave us language, symbolism, and the deep comfort of knowing that even in chaos, something can hold. And so beneath the Mediterranean, the stone anchor still whispers. It whispers of voyages begun at Tyre, sails unfurled to Cyprus, trade with Egypt, journeys to Carthage. It whispers of fear and courage, of men who stared at the horizon and dared to chase it. It whispers of storms that tore ships apart, of calm mornings when the sea was like glass. It whispers most of all of time, of the strange truth that while men vanish, objects remain, and in them echoes of humanity endure. Perhaps that is why archaeologists treat these anchors not as mere tools but as sacred remnants. For when you hold one, you hold the weight of countless untold stories. You hold the balance between survival and loss. You hold the trust of sailors who looked out upon endless waters and chose, against all odds, to go. And somewhere, in the hush of waves along Lebanon's coast, another anchor may still rest, hidden, waiting for divers to stumble upon it, for the sunlight to touch it once more, waiting to remind us that storms, though fierce, can be chained, not defeated, not mastered, but held at bay by the simplest of human inventions. And so the anchor endures, as we drift softly into sleep, tethered not by stone, but by the steady rhythm of memory, carried gently, like a ship in calm waters, into dreams. The faces that gaze through sand, beneath the restless waters of the Bay of Bengal, where the tides push and pull with a rhythm older than memory, the whispers of stone linger. Along the coast of Tamil Nadu, south of Chennai, a stretch of land once echoed with chants, bells, and the steady hum of chisels against granite. Today only fragments remain visible on shore. Carved reliefs, weather-worn shrines, and the famous shore temple of Mahabalipuram standing like a sentinel against the sea. Yet for generations fishermen have told stories of more. Stories of entire temples swallowed by the ocean, their towers glimmering beneath waves, their faces, carved in stone, still gazing upward through sand and water. The legend is that there were once 7 magnificent temples, so dazzling that they seemed to rival the heavens themselves. Only one, the shore temple, stands above water now. The others, they say, were claimed by the sea. Some call them myth, some call them memory, but every tide, every storm, every subtle shift of sand seems to murmur the same question: what sleeps beneath the waves? To begin imagining it, close your eyes and let the sound of the ocean wash over you. Hear the hiss of foam as waves drag across sand. Smell the salt that clings to the air, sharp yet familiar. Feel the humid breeze that sweeps across the Coromandel coast, and then, slowly, descend beneath the surface. Light shimmers above like broken glass. Fish move in flashes of silver. And there, half buried in sand, you begin to see it. A carved face, serene, patient, weathered, staring back. Eyes half-lidded in eternal meditation. Lips curved into the faintest smile. A god, a guardian, a fragment of something once monumental. That is what divers have found near Mahabalipuram. Not entire temples rising like mountains beneath the waves, but blocks of stone, pillars, fragments of walls, and most haunting of all, faces. Carved figures of deities and guardians, their expressions undisturbed by centuries of salt water. Each one a reminder that what stands on land may be only part of the story. Mahabalipuram, or Mamalapuram as it was once called, was no ordinary city. In the 7th and 8th centuries, under the rule of the Pallava dynasty, it became a workshop of gods in stone. The Pallavas were seafarers and builders, patrons of art and temple architecture. They did not merely carve temples from blocks of stone, they carved the very rock of the earth, sculpting entire shrines from living granite. Caves, rathas, temples carved like chariots, and reliefs like the great descent of the Ganges panel, stretching across rock like a tapestry of myth. This was not architecture as utility. This was devotion frozen into stone. But Mahabalipuram was also a port. Ships came and went, sails dotted the horizon, and the town's skyline, filled with temple towers, served as both spiritual beacon and practical marker for sailors navigating the Bay of Bengal. Imagine approaching from the sea. You would see not just one temple, but a cluster, their towers rising in rhythm, reflecting the light of the setting sun. A sight so grand it must have seemed eternal, and yet the sea is patient, and it does not forget. Storms batter the coast, waves eat away at stone, sand shifts like a living thing. Slowly, year by year, temples that once welcomed ships may have found themselves closer to the tide. One day a storm larger than most might have pushed farther. One season, the waters may have risen just enough, and then the temples were gone. For centuries the stories persisted. Fishermen told of glimpses of carved shapes beneath the water, of shadows that looked like walls, of nets caught on stones where no stones should be. To them it was not legend but memory. Something passed down, as true as the tides themselves. In 2004, when the Indian Ocean tsunami struck, the sea retreated before it returned. In those brief moments, witnesses along Mahabalipuram's coast saw something extraordinary. Stone structures, long hidden beneath waves, revealed in stark clarity. Walls, steps, and carvings glimmered in sunlight, only to vanish once more when the sea came rushing back. For archaeologists, it was confirmation. For locals, it was proof of what they had always known. The faces beneath the sand were real. Today, divers have mapped submerged ruins near the shore temple, rectangular blocks aligned in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Some suggest entire complexes lie there, scattered across the seabed, the remnants of temples lost to time. And when you consider the legends of the 7 pagodas, it seems less like myth and more like memory dressed in story. 1 above water, 6 below. What haunts the imagination most, however, are not the walls or steps but the faces, those carvings of gods who gaze upward still, as if unbothered by their drowning. Vishnu reclining on his serpent bed, lions crouching in eternal watch, guardians with stern eyes, their duty unbroken even in silence. They do not appear mournful, they do not appear broken, they appear patient, as though waiting. Close your eyes again and let yourself drift further. Picture the ocean at night, when the moon spills silver across the water. Beneath the surface, the temples are silent. Fish drift through their corridors, corals cling to their edges, sand buries and reveals them in turn. But if you linger, if you wait long enough, you may begin to feel that faint awareness of being watched, not by malice, but by presence. Faces beneath the waves, gazing through sand, neither lost nor found, simply waiting. What makes Mahabalipuram's submerged temples so haunting is the mixture of certainty and uncertainty. We know the Pallavas built marvels, we know the sea is encroaching, claiming land inch by inch. We know ruins lie beneath. But how much is buried? How many temples? How many stories? Archaeology has only begun to map what the ocean holds. The rest is silence, guarded by tides. Perhaps this is why legends take root so deeply here. For when the truth is only half revealed, the imagination fills the rest. Some say the gods themselves pulled the temples into the sea, jealous of human artistry. Others claim they were built as offerings, meant to stand between land and water, and when the balance shifted, the sea simply reclaimed what was hers. Each tale reflects the awe the temples inspired. For how else could stone seem so alive, so eternal, except by divine touch? Think of the artisans who carved them, men with chisels in hand, perched on scaffolds, striking granite with patience. Each blow releasing a shape hidden within stone. They carved lions crouching, elephants marching, deities with serene faces. Did they imagine their work would outlast kingdoms? Did they know the sea would one day swallow them? Or did they believe, as many of us do, that stone is forever? The irony is that the faces did endure. The sea could not erase them, it could only cover them, and in doing so, it gave them a second life, preserved in silence, untouched by war, hidden until the right moment. Now they gaze not at worshippers or kings, but at the endless dark of the ocean, and at us, when we dare descend to meet them. Mahabalipuram is not the only place where the sea has swallowed stone. Heraklion in Egypt, Pavlopetri in Greece, Dwarka farther north along India's coast, all lie beneath waves, reminders that the boundary between land and sea is never fixed. Yet Mahabalipuram feels different, perhaps because its temples are not just ruins but art, not just structures but expressions of devotion. To see a human face carved by hand, staring back through water, is to feel the thinness of time, to realize that those artisans are gone, but their vision remains. And so the legend of the 7 pagodas persists. Tourists come to see the shore temple, waves crashing against its base, its granite walls glowing gold at sunrise. Fishermen still tell of other towers beneath. Archaeologists dive, map, debate, but the faces beneath the sand do not argue. They do not need to. They wait, patient as stone, until the sea decides to show them again. Perhaps that is the true power of Mahabalipuram. It reminds us that not everything must be uncovered, explained, displayed. Some histories are meant to remain half-hidden, revealed only in fragments, so that wonder never fully dies. And as you drift now into stillness, think of those faces, their calm eyes, their faint smiles, their timeless patience. They gaze upward, not with urgency, but with serenity, as though they know the sea is not their prison, but their temple. They are not lost, they are only waiting, and so, gently, you can let the waves carry you too, into quiet, into rest, into dreams where the temples rise again in full, glowing in sunlight, their towers unbroken, their faces gazing not through sand but through the open air, eternal as the sea itself. The helmet that dreamed in the sea. Beneath the shifting blue of the Mediterranean, where light falls in wavering patterns and silence hums like an ancient hymn, an object rested for centuries. It was bronze, greened with the patina of time, shaped into the form of a warrior's protection, a Corinthian helmet. Its eyes, hollow yet fierce, stared outward through the haze of water. Once it might have gleamed in sunlight, polished and proud atop the head of a soldier who stood among thousands at the Battle of Salamis. Now it dreamed in the sea, its visions wrapped not in war, but in the deep quiet of tides. The story of this helmet begins not in the sea, but in fire. Bronze, born from the mingling of copper and tin, was cast and hammered into shape by craftsmen who had inherited a lineage of skill stretching back through generations. Imagine a workshop in ancient Greece. The clang of hammer against metal, sparks lifting in the air, the heat so intense that sweat streaked down the arms of those who worked. The craftsman would have shaped the helmet with precision, narrowing the eye holes to slits, curving the cheek guards to cover the face, and leaving only a small space for the mouth. To wear it was to become something other than human. To become a mask of war, a living statue forged from bronze. The Corinthian helmet was more than armor. It was a statement. When soldiers stood side by side, their helmets gleaming, their faces hidden, they seemed less like men, and more like a single, unyielding force. Each soldier, known as a hoplite, carried a round shield, a spear, and wore his helmet like a second skin. In battle, the sound of bronze striking bronze would echo across the field, a thunder of metal that drowned out fear. The helmet erased individuality, transforming farmers, potters, and craftsmen into warriors of the polis. But the helmet from Salamis did not remain on land. It journeyed to the sea, not by accident, but by war. For in 480 BCE, the waters near Salamis became the stage of one of history's most decisive battles, a clash not just of armies, but of worlds. On one side stood the Persians, their fleet vast and seemingly unstoppable. On the other, the Greeks, fewer in number, their cities fractured by rivalry, but united by the threat of conquest. The Persians had burned Athens, their armies marched across the land, and their fleet filled the horizon. The Greeks, desperate, turned to the sea. Themistocles, the cunning Athenian strategist, lured the Persians into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, numbers would mean less, and maneuverability would mean everything. The battle that followed was chaos turned to order, fury turned to strategy. Picture it, dawn breaking, the sky tinged with red, the sea alive with the creak of oars. Greek triremes, sleek, fast, with bronze rams on their bows, waited in formation. Persian ships, larger but less suited to tight waters, advanced with confidence, and then, with a cry that cut through the salt-heavy air, the Greeks surged forward, the clash of wood against wood, the splintering of hulls, the screams of men thrown into the sea. The straits became a theater of destruction. Somewhere in that battle, amid the shouting and the crash of ships, a soldier wore this helmet. Perhaps he stood on the deck of a trireme, spear in hand, shield raised. Perhaps he fought as the ships locked together, bronze against bronze, his vision narrowed by the eye slits of his helmet. He may have struck, parried, endured, until at last, he fell, into the water, the weight of his armor dragging him down. His helmet slipped free, or remained on his head as the sea claimed him. Either way, it sank, slowly, to the seabed, where silence swallowed it whole, and there it dreamed. For centuries it lay in darkness, sand drifting over its curves, small creatures making homes in its hollow spaces. The world above shifted, empires rose and fell, new gods were worshipped, languages changed, but beneath, the helmet endured, a memory waiting to surface. When divers discovered it, lifting it once more into light, it seemed less like an object and more like a survivor. The sea had changed its color, but not its shape. Its eyes still stared, fierce and unyielding, though no man's face hid behind them anymore. To look into it was to feel both the terror of battle and the stillness of the sea. The helmet is a reminder that history is not only written in scrolls or sung in poems, but also in the objects that linger long after the voices have faded. To hold it, or even to see it, is to feel the weight of two worlds, the world of men, shouting and clashing in fury, and the world of the sea, where time slows, and all things eventually fall silent. But what does it mean for an object like this to dream? Imagine the helmet, resting on the seabed, touched by currents that swirl like whispers. Each shift of sand recalls the rhythm of marching feet. Each ripple of water is like the cry of a commander echoing faintly. The helmet remembers not in words but in sensations. The strike of spear against bronze, the heat of a warrior's breath inside its narrow chamber, the sudden cold of water rushing in, and in those dreams the helmet does not see defeat. It sees the unity of men who stood together, shoulder to shoulder, facing something greater than themselves. For at Salamis, the Greeks did not just win a battle, they preserved a way of life. Had they lost, the tide of Persian conquest might have swept all before it, altering the course of Western civilization. In that sense, the helmet's dream is not one of drowning, but of victory, the memory of a turning point where the future itself shifted. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine descending into the waters near Salamis, where the sea is green and full of drifting light. Fish glide past, their scales flickering like tiny shields. The seabed is uneven, littered with stones and fragments, and there, half buried, lies the curve of bronze. You brush the sand away, and the helmet stares back as though it has been waiting. The hollow eyes are not empty but full of time, full of silence, full of dreams too deep for words. What makes the helmet haunting is not merely its age, but the intimacy of its form. A sword, a shield, even a ship, these are tools, distant from the body. But a helmet rests upon the head. It feels the sweat of the brow, the rush of breath, the pounding of blood in the temples during battle. It carries the heat of fear and the determination of courage. To find a helmet beneath the sea is to find not just a weapon, but a trace of the man who wore it, a ghost in bronze. And so the helmet dreamed, and still dreams, of faces long gone, of eyes that once blinked behind its slits, of voices that once shouted through its narrow mouthguard. It dreams of the oars striking the sea in rhythm, of the crash of ships in the straits, of the shout of victory rising over the waters. And then, as all dreams do, it returns to silence. What remains for us is not to awaken it, but to listen, to stand before it and let its silence speak. For silence too can tell stories, if we are patient enough to hear. The helmet that dreamed in the sea reminds us that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, half hidden, waiting for tides to shift. And sometimes, when the sea is calm and the light falls just right, those dreams rise once more to meet us. The cup that waited in coral. Beneath the turquoise waters off the coast of Zakynthos, where the sunlight filters through waves in dancing patterns, there lies a story that has waited for millennia. The sea is quiet here, its currents slow, its depths a repository for memories of a world long past. Among the scattered stones and broken fragments of ships, one object gleams faintly, even in the dim underwater light: a gold cup. Minoan in origin, its surface worn smooth by centuries of salt and motion, encrusted in coral, waiting. This cup was not always underwater. Long ago it rested in the hands of someone whose world was defined by artistry, ritual, and the mysteries of the Mediterranean. The Minoans were masters of bronze, clay, and gold, creating works that seemed to flow with life itself. Their palaces were adorned with frescoes of dolphins, bulls, and lilies, their society ruled by rituals that intertwined the sacred and the mundane. The cup, a vessel of precious metal, was likely used for offerings, libations, or ceremonial drink, a connection between the human and the divine. Imagine it once in a Minoan palace. Sunlight filtering through columns of stone and plaster, the air filled with the fragrance of incense. Perhaps it was set upon an altar, catching the light as a priest or priestess poured fragrant liquids into it, murmuring prayers to the gods. The gold surface would have reflected flickering flame, shimmering with warmth. Perhaps the cup held wine, honey, or perfumed oils. And perhaps those who drank from it believed they tasted the divine, that their spirits touched the world beyond the earthly realm. The cup was small, intimate, yet made to last. Its curves are subtle, the rim perfectly shaped for the hand, and the weight balanced in a way that speaks of care and craftsmanship. Gold is soft and pliant, yet enduring, and this cup bore the touch of artisans who had learned their craft over decades. Each hammer stroke, each delicate engraving a testament to a civilization that prized beauty as a form of devotion. Yet time and tide were patient. The cup did not remain in the palace. Ships that carried Minoan goods, treasures of artisanship, and offerings to distant lands sailed the Mediterranean. Trade was the lifeblood of the Minoans, and their ships carried not only goods but culture, belief, and stories. One such ship, laden with treasures, including the gold cup, embarked on a voyage that would not reach its destination. A storm arose, sudden and fierce, a tempest that turned calm seas into a churning wilderness. Waves towered, winds howled, and sailors clung to rigging as their vessel pitched and rolled. Amid this chaos, the treasures of Minoan hands, objects that had once been worshipped and revered, were thrown into the sea. The cup slipped from the ship, tumbling through the water, gold glinting against the dark blue of the deep, before it finally came to rest upon the seabed. There it remained, undisturbed by human hands, save for the currents that passed and the creatures that made their home upon it. Coral encrusted its edges, soft sediment draped across its surface, and centuries of water wore it smooth. It was both hidden and revealed, a secret of the sea, waiting for those who might uncover it, waiting for the right moment to remind the world of the civilizations that once thrived along these shores. Imagine diving down to it, the water around you cool and green, the sunlight filtering in rays that shimmer like living threads. Fish glide past, curious, ignoring your presence. The cup sits quietly on the sand, encrusted with life, yet unmistakable in its form. When touched gently, it feels heavier than expected, weighted by history, by the hands that made it, by the ship that carried it, and by the sea that cradled it for centuries. The story of this cup is also a story of preservation. Gold, unlike bronze or iron, resists corrosion, yet the sea leaves its mark in layers of marine growth and sediment. The coral that clings to it is not mere decoration, it is a witness to centuries, a living record of passage, of time, measured not in human lifetimes but in the rhythms of waves, the rise and fall of tides, and the slow dance of currents. Archaeologists who discovered the cup were awed by its survival. To find a Minoan artifact in the depths of the Mediterranean is to touch the past in a way that books and ruins cannot convey. Unlike objects buried in soil, the cup has endured the pressures of water, the movement of sand, the scraping of small creatures, and yet its form remains. It is a miracle of endurance, a vessel that connects modern eyes to hands that lived thousands of years ago. Consider the Minoans themselves. Their world was one of vibrancy and ritual. Palaces like Knossos were centers of power and culture, with corridors that seemed to twist and turn, frescoes that depicted life in motion, and sacred areas where ceremonies connected humans to gods. A cup like this might have been used in such ceremonies, perhaps in libations to Poseidon, the god of the sea, or to other deities who were central to Minoan belief. To drink from it was to participate in an act that transcended daily life, to taste the divine. And now, the cup rests in silence, submerged, almost dreaming beneath coral and sand. It waits for hands to lift it again, for eyes to meet its ancient gleam. It holds within it the whispers of the past, of storm-tossed waves, of sailors praying for survival, of priests invoking blessings, and of craftsmen pouring care into its shape. It is a witness to human hope, human ingenuity, and the indomitable passage of time. When we think of artifacts like this, we often imagine them in museums, placed on velvet cushions, lit by soft lamps, catalogued and described. But the cup in Zakynthos is alive in a different way. Underwater, it interacts with its environment. Light refracts through water, currents bring nutrients and small life forms, and coral attaches, creating a miniature ecosystem. The cup is part of a cycle that is both natural and historical, connecting past human effort to the ongoing processes of the world. And yet there is still mystery. Who exactly held this cup in the palace? Who sailed with it on the fateful journey? Were offerings poured into it by the hand of a high priest, or did it pass between nobles in ceremonies of wealth and faith? The answers are lost to time, yet the cup itself speaks, through its endurance, through its presence, through the very fact that it survived at all. Imagine for a moment holding the cup in your mind's eye. Its golden surface is worn smooth, edges softened by coral and the gentle movement of sand. Its interior, once a vessel for libations, might still hint at the shape of liquid poured within it. Light catches on it underwater, scattering in refracted patterns that seem almost magical, like the shimmering dances painted in Minoan frescoes. Each glint is a fragment of history, a reflection of a world now silent but not forgotten. The sea has preserved the cup in a way that land could not. On land, centuries of soil, human settlement, and war might have obscured it, buried it under layers of upheaval. Beneath the water, it has been cradled and protected, its story kept intact, awaiting discovery. It is as if the cup chose the sea as its guardian, knowing that one day, careful hands would reach it, and the world would remember the people who once cherished it. Even now, modern archaeologists describe the cup with awe. Every detail, from its shape to the traces of design, provides insight into Minoan culture. It teaches us about their craft, their ritual practices, their relationship with the sea, and their understanding of beauty and symbolism. And yet, it leaves room for wonder, for imagination, for the mind to wander along currents of time, as it drifts among the ruins of the ship and the sands of the seabed. To contemplate the cup is to connect with history on an intimate level. Unlike written records which tell us what people thought, the cup tells us what people touched, what they saw, what they held dear. It is tactile history, a bridge across millennia, a vessel of human presence, frozen in coral and gold. And as night falls over the island of Zakynthos, as stars reflect on the quiet waves, the cup waits still. Perhaps it dreams of the palace where it was born, of the hands that shaped it, of the storm that sent it to the depths, and of the moments when it will once again be held and admired. Its journey is complete in some ways, yet ongoing in others, for as long as it remains in the sea, it participates in the eternal cycle of preservation and discovery. So we drift alongside it, imagining the currents passing through its hollow, imagining the glint of gold as light filters from above, imagining the lives it touched, the hands that poured wine, the lips that drank with reverence. We float in quiet awe, sensing the past as if it were a gentle pulse in the water, knowing that the cup's story is both specific and infinite, anchored in history yet timeless. The Minoan gold cup from the Zakynthos shipwreck is not merely a vessel, it is a testament to human ingenuity, to the endurance of beauty and to the power of the sea to hold memories. Its gold has not tarnished, its form has not collapsed, and it has waited patiently, like a sentinel of time, for someone to notice, to imagine, to dream alongside it. Even the smallest details carry weight. The slight curve of the lip, the faint indentations where fingers once held it, the way coral grows across its surface, each tells a story. Every imperfection is a record of centuries underwater, of the rhythms of tides and the lives of creatures that made it their home. The cup, once a sacred object, now belongs to both human memory and the natural world, bridging the divide between man and sea. When divers reach it, they must move slowly, respectfully, knowing that this is a treasure not just of gold but of time itself. To lift it is to hold a fragment of Minoan life, of the ship that carried it, of the storm that claimed it, and of the waters that preserved it. The cup is heavy, but it carries a weight that is invisible. The weight of centuries, of human endeavor, of mystery, and of quiet endurance beneath coral and wave. And as we leave it, imagining it sinking once more gently onto the sand, we realize that the cup does not belong to us alone. It belongs to history, to the sea, and to the silent, enduring dream of the Minoans. It is a bridge between worlds, a golden whisper beneath the waves, waiting, patient, eternal. The crown that lay in silt, beneath the muted waves of the northern Black Sea, in waters that shimmer between steel and emerald, there rests a story waiting to be remembered. The silt is thick here, soft as velvet, and it has claimed the remnants of history with patience and care. In this watery world where the tides move slowly and the currents whisper to one another, lies an object of exquisite craftsmanship, a Byzantine gold diadem, a crown of kings and emperors, entombed by the sea and buried beneath centuries of sediment. The crown did not sink into obscurity lightly. It once rested upon the head of someone powerful, perhaps a ruler or a member of the Byzantine aristocracy, whose life was filled with ceremonies, rituals, and the constant scrutiny of court and clergy. Gold, jewels, and intricate metalwork spoke of wealth, authority, and divine favor. The diadem was not merely ornamental, it was a symbol of legitimacy, a declaration that this individual was chosen to rule, to govern, and to maintain the delicate balance between earthly and heavenly authority. Imagine long ago in a hall of polished marble, sunlight filtering through stained glass, and the muffled sounds of attendants moving across stone floors. The crown, resplendent in gold, adorned with precious stones that captured the light in glimmers of ruby, sapphire, and emerald, rested gently atop a ruler's head. It was not heavy in a burdened sense, but it carried the weight of responsibility, of expectation, of legacy. To wear it was to bear witness to the power of the empire, to the ritualized world of Byzantium, and to the delicate choreography of life and death in the courts. The craftsmanship of the crown was extraordinary. Byzantine goldsmiths were unmatched in their skill, melding metals with artistry and precision. Every curve, every setting, every engraving carried meaning, symbols of faith, protection, and imperial authority. The diadem might have been used in coronation ceremonies or in processions through the streets of Constantinople, or perhaps during private rituals in chapels and palaces. It was both a personal ornament and a public statement, declaring status, divine favor, and the wearer's place in the tapestry of empire. Yet the crown did not remain in the halls of power. Ships sailed across the Black Sea, carrying goods, treasures, and emissaries between cities. Trade was constant, and the waters were both lifeline and threat. The crown, like many precious objects, traveled with people who had power and wealth, perhaps as part of a diplomatic mission, perhaps in hiding during a time of political turmoil. The sea, with its currents and tempests, was patient and impartial, and it claimed the diadem in a moment of chaos. One day, a storm of unimaginable intensity struck the coast. Waves towered, winds shrieked, and sailors clung to rigging and masts as their vessel succumbed to the sea. Amid the turmoil, the diadem slipped from its secure hold, a golden beacon among the shadows of the deep. It tumbled and drifted, spinning gently through the water, until the heavy silt of the Black Sea embraced it. There, in a silence deeper than any human ear could perceive, it settled, waiting. The Black Sea is unique in its preservation. Its lower layers are anoxic, devoid of oxygen, which slows the decay of organic materials and shields metal objects from the corrosion that would claim them elsewhere. In this environment, the diadem endured centuries untouched, preserved not only by the patience of silt but by the very nature of the sea itself. Coral, shells, and small marine life adhered to it over time, creating a soft, living veil, but beneath it, the gold remained brilliant, the stones still catching the faintest glimmers of filtered light. Imagine diving to that depth, the water pressing gently against your body, currents carrying whispers of the past. The diadem is visible through a haze of silt, glinting with a quiet brilliance, the stones faintly reflecting the light from above. The moment is hushed, sacred almost, as though the crown itself acknowledges your presence, allowing you to witness a fragment of history preserved by water, by patience, by time itself. The story of the crown is also a story of human ambition and devotion. Byzantium was a civilization defined by its rituals, its courtly life, and its pursuit of both political and spiritual authority. Crowns were not mere adornments, they were imbued with symbolism and power, representing the divine right to rule, the unity of church and state, and the weight of centuries of tradition. To touch the diadem, even in imagination, is to sense the human desire for immortality, for significance, and for connection to forces greater than oneself. Think of the hands that shaped it. Byzantine goldsmiths would have worked with incredible precision, hammering, engraving, and setting precious stones with tools and techniques perfected over decades. Each gem, each curve, each detail carries intention, a prayer, a blessing, a mark of authority. And as the crown slipped from its worldly context and sank into the Black Sea, those intentions were carried with it, submerged in a timeless, watery silence. The diadem is more than an artifact, it is a witness. It saw the life of the court, the ceremonies, the triumphs and defeats of rulers, the whispers of intrigue, the prayers offered in chapels, and the echoes of political machinations. Then it saw the storm, the chaos of the sea, the surrender of human control to nature's vast and impartial power. And in the centuries that followed, it witnessed nothing at all, save the gentle accumulation of silt and the slow growth of marine life upon its surface. When archaeologists discovered the diadem, they were drawn not only to its beauty, but to its story. Every detail, from the slight wear on the gold to the positioning of the stones, revealed secrets about its origin, its use, and the civilization that created it. To hold it, even in thought, is to bridge a gap of more than 1,000 years, to feel the pulse of Byzantium in the quiet patience of the Black Sea. Imagine the diadem now, resting silently beneath the water, coral growing gently along its edges, silt forming a soft bed beneath it. Fish glide past, their movements slow and deliberate, oblivious to the human fascination with the artifact. The crown has become part of the marine ecosystem, a sentinel of history, a jewel of time preserved through circumstance, through patience, and through the depths of the Black Sea. Even now, there is mystery. Who wore this crown last? Was it lost in a battle, during a retreat, or on a diplomatic mission gone awry? Were there other treasures aboard the ship, now scattered across the seabed, waiting like silent companions to be rediscovered? The sea guards these answers with care, revealing them only to those patient enough to search, to dive, to study, and to imagine. Consider the symbolism of crowns in Byzantine culture. They were not just personal adornments. They were talismans of authority, markers of status, and instruments of political legitimacy. The wearer's power was visually reinforced by the gold, by the gems, by the artistry of the object itself. In ceremonies, the crown could confer divine favor, solidify succession, and signal the wearer's connection to the sacred. To lose such an object to the sea was not merely a loss of wealth, but a loss of symbolism, a fragment of history that slipped quietly beneath waves. And yet, through its preservation, the crown tells a different story. It is a story of endurance, of survival, of the ability of human craftsmanship to outlast tumult, conflict, and the passage of centuries. It is a reminder that even in loss, beauty can endure, that even in the silence of deep waters, history whispers to those who listen. Imagine reaching out, diving slowly through the Black Sea, and touching the crown. Its surface is smooth from centuries of water. Its stones still embedded firmly, glinting faintly as light filters down. The silt shifts beneath your hands, and you sense the weight not just of gold, but of time itself. Each curve, each engraving, each glimmer of gemstone carries stories, prayers, rituals, and ambitions that span generations. The crown also speaks to the relationship between humanity and the sea. For centuries, people have relied upon, feared, and revered the Black Sea, a vast body of water that has carried ships, treasures, and secrets. Storms could destroy entire fleets, currents could scatter goods across miles of ocean floor, and yet the sea also preserves. The diadem's survival is a testament to this duality, the sea as both destroyer and protector, as both a realm of chaos and a sanctuary of silence. Even the smallest details tell a story. The slight indentation where a finger might have rested, the way a gem catches light differently beneath water, the soft erosion of gold in contact with silt. Each is a trace of interaction, a record of time and environment. The crown has become a hybrid entity, human in origin, natural in its current state, a convergence of artistry and environment, history and nature, and so the diadem waits. It waits beneath the gentle waves, beneath the soft silt, cradled by the Black Sea. It waits for those who might uncover it, study it, or simply imagine it, floating in the mind as vividly as it floats beneath the waves. Its story is endless, unfolding slowly in the imagination, layer by layer, like sediment settling over centuries. To think of the crown is to think of Byzantium, a civilization of splendor, ritual, and complexity, and to sense the immense span of time that has passed. It is to imagine palaces, processions, whispered prayers, storms at sea, and the slow patience of the underwater world. It is to witness the endurance of beauty, the persistence of history, and the quiet majesty of human craftsmanship preserved by nature itself. In this way, the crown is not lost. It is not forgotten. It exists in a liminal space, between past and present, between human touch and marine life, between the known and the mysterious. It is a meditation on endurance, on the interplay of human ambition and natural preservation, on the quiet, patient passage of centuries that shapes all things. As we drift alongside it in our imagination, we can see the gold catching faint light, the gems flickering like distant stars, the silt forming a soft cushion beneath it. We can hear the silence of the deep, broken only by the gentle movement of water and the subtle sound of marine life. We sense the lives that created it, the storms that claimed it, and the hands that will someday perhaps reach it again. The diadem is heavy with meaning. It represents power, faith, artistry, survival, and mystery. Its story is both specific and universal, rooted in Byzantium but floating freely in imagination. It reminds us that the past is never truly gone, that objects can speak, that time is a continuum, and that even in silence and obscurity, beauty endures. Every glimmer, every curve, every stone tells a fragment of a larger narrative, a narrative that stretches across centuries and cultures, across sea and sediment, across human imagination. To dwell on the crown is to dwell on history itself, to trace connections, to marvel at endurance, and to appreciate the quiet poetry of survival beneath the waves. And so it remains, beneath the Black Sea, cradled by silt and water, patient and eternal, waiting, as all treasures do, for eyes that see not just its surface, but its story. Waiting, as all history waits, for someone to listen, to imagine, and to remember. The idol that sank with its priests. Beneath the calm, brackish waters of the Gulf of Cambay, off the western coast of India, lies a story hidden beneath centuries of tides, sediment, and silence. The Gulf is a place where the water meets history in layers both tangible and invisible, where currents have carried secrets long forgotten, and where time has chosen to preserve rather than erase. Amidst the shifting sands and coral-encrusted stones rest remnants of a civilization that once flourished, now veiled in the gentle embrace of the sea. Here, scattered across the ocean floor, lie statues of priests and idols, meticulously carved and reverently positioned, as though frozen in a ritual that time itself could not complete. These figurines were once the center of devotion, instruments through which mortals sought to communicate with the divine, protect their communities, and anchor their beliefs to something eternal. Made of stone, terracotta, and other materials resilient enough to endure both sun and storm, these idols have survived centuries beneath waves that have erased so much else. Imagine the day when these idols first felt the salt water at their feet. Once they had been upright in temples, courtyards, and sanctuaries, placed on pedestals or in ceremonial niches, bathed in sunlight and shadow, surrounded by incense, chants, and the devotion of the faithful. They were witnesses to prayers whispered in the early morning, offerings laid down in reverence, and the solemn processions of priests who carried them in ritualized movement. Every curve, every carved line, every symbol etched into their forms carried meaning, blessings, protection, and the sanctity of the sacred. And yet, the Gulf of Cambay has not always been a quiet guardian. Rising seas, shifting sands, and devastating floods gradually reclaimed the land. Villages disappeared, temples were swallowed by water, and the idols were displaced from their sacred homes. Perhaps it was a sudden cataclysm that submerged them, a storm or tsunami that tore through the coast, lifting priests and their charges from the earth and depositing them in the depths below. Or perhaps it was the gradual, inexorable rise of the sea, claiming coastlines, reshaping landscapes, and altering the lives of countless generations. To descend into the Gulf today is to enter a world suspended between past and present. Visibility is muted, filtered through a haze of sediment and plankton. The idols lie scattered, or in clusters, some upright as though still participating in a ritual, others toppled or leaning, partially buried in the sand, encrusted with shells, algae, and the gentle growths of time. They are silent witnesses to a vanished civilization, speaking not in words but in presence, form, and texture. The craftsmanship of these figurines is remarkable. They reflect a society deeply invested in ritual, artistry, and the embodiment of belief. Each statue represents not just a human figure but an idea, a function, and a connection to the divine. Priestly figures may have carried tools, staffs, or gestures, symbolizing their office and sacred duties. Deities may have been depicted in stylized forms, combining human and animal features, adorned with intricate headdresses or jewelry, embodying both power and protection. To study them is to trace the hand of the artisan and the mind of a culture that sought to communicate with forces beyond itself. The positioning of these idols beneath the waves is telling. Many are aligned as if still in ritual formation, facing east toward the rising sun, or oriented according to principles of sacred geometry. This is no random scattering. It reflects the careful planning and religious intent of a civilization whose practices intertwined faith, astronomy, and the cycles of nature. The sea has preserved this spatial memory, allowing modern observers to glimpse not only the artifacts, but the organization, logic, and sacred significance of their original context. The waters of the Gulf of Cambay are unusually calm in some areas, creating pockets where the idols are shielded from the harsher effects of currents. Yet in other regions, strong tidal flows have shifted them, partially exposing one statue while burying another. Over time, marine life has claimed these statues as habitat. Coral and sponges cling to limbs and torsos, fish dart among them, and the soft silt forms protective layers over their bases. The combination of natural preservation and biological adaptation has created an underwater tableau that is both living and historical, a silent intersection of past civilization and present ecosystem. Consider the priests themselves, the human bearers of ritual, now vanished into the mists of history. Their hands carved these forms, their gestures animated the ceremonies, and their voices echoed through stone halls and open courtyards. And when disaster struck, when the temple sank, or the waves rose higher than anyone had imagined, these figures were not abandoned but submerged alongside the human devotion that created them. They became symbols of continuity, silent participants in a ceremony that spanned centuries, a meditation on the endurance of faith, even when the world above has vanished. The idols also tell a story of material culture and trade. The choice of stone, clay, and other media speaks to the resources available to the society, to its artisanship and access to skilled labor. Some figurines may have been painted, though traces of pigment now vanish under centuries of saltwater exposure. Others were deliberately weighted to remain upright, or designed with interlocking bases to maintain stability. Each design decision reflects practical knowledge, aesthetic sensibility, and spiritual intention, a fusion of the mundane and the sacred. Explorers and archaeologists who dive these waters are met not only with the artifacts, but with the sensation of time suspended. Every encounter is intimate and delicate. Currents can lift fine silt that obscures vision, and even the slightest movement can disturb centuries of sediment. The experience is contemplative, almost ritualistic in itself. To descend into the Gulf of Cambay is to walk through history with water as your guide, to feel the quiet presence of priests, worshippers, and gods, long gone, yet still vividly present in the material traces they left behind. The Gulf itself has stories etched into its shifting sands. Ancient river channels, submerged settlements, and layers of geological change all speak to a landscape in flux, a world where human civilization and natural forces intertwine. The idols are a tangible trace of that history, a reminder that culture is fragile, yet persistent, that faith can endure even when land disappears beneath water, and that objects can become bridges between human memory and natural preservation. Some figurines show signs of interaction with humans even after their submersion. Marks, scratches, or slightly eroded features may indicate early recovery attempts, looting, or movement by fishermen. Yet despite centuries of human and natural interference, the majority of these idols remain remarkably preserved, their forms recognizable, their gestures intact, their presence commanding and serene. They offer an intimate, tactile connection to the world that produced them, allowing us to imagine the ceremonies, prayers, and daily rhythms of the priests who once tended to them. The symbolism of the idols is complex. Priests represent intercessors, intermediaries between humans and gods, while deities embody aspects of life, death, fertility, protection, and power. Their submersion beneath the sea transforms their meaning slightly. They are no longer objects of immediate ritual, but symbols of endurance, resilience, and memory. They remind us that faith is not bound by geography, that devotion can transcend catastrophe, and that even in silence, meaning can persist. Imagine a diver approaching the site at dusk. Light filters through the water, soft and diffuse, creating shadows that play across the forms of priests and idols. Fish weave through their limbs, silt swirls with every movement, and a sense of reverence hangs in the water, palpable and almost tangible. The scene is both serene and haunting, a meditation on impermanence, preservation, and the quiet persistence of human intention. The Gulf of Cambay is not alone in holding submerged treasures. Across the world, waters have claimed temples, cities, and sacred objects, preserving them in a unique state of stasis. Yet the combination of antiquity, density of artifacts, and preservation conditions here make it particularly remarkable. Each figurine is a story, each arrangement a ritual, each gesture a connection to a civilization whose physical remains have vanished, but whose spiritual echoes endure. Over time, the sea's chemistry has subtly altered the surfaces of the figurines. Salt crystals form delicate patterns on stone and clay. Microalgae give faint greenish hues, and marine organisms attach themselves in slow, deliberate growths. This is not decay, but transformation. The idols have become part of the underwater ecosystem, symbiotic with coral, fish, and sediment, maintaining their sacred forms while participating in the rhythms of a living ocean. Imagine tracing a finger along a submerged priest's arm, feeling the contours of centuries, the smoothness of water-worn surfaces, the slight imperfections from human creation and natural erosion alike. Each touch is a meditation on time, impermanence, and endurance. connecting the present observer with people who lived, prayed, and believed long before any modern map marked the Gulf of Cambay. The idols speak not only to the religious practices of the past, but to broader human concerns: mortality, devotion, artistry, and the intersection of culture and nature. They embody resilience, surviving floods, storms, and centuries of submerged obscurity. They remind us that human creation is never entirely lost. It is transformed, preserved in unexpected ways, and waiting for discovery, understanding, and reverence. Every element of the site contributes to its storytelling power. The arrangement of idols, the remnants of temple floors, the scattered artifacts of ritual, all invite interpretation. Some may have been offerings, others symbolic gestures, and some could reflect social hierarchy, priestly authority, or localized worship practices. Together they form a tableau of spiritual life, frozen beneath the sea, waiting for eyes and imagination to give them new voice. Even now, sonar and scanning technologies reveal more than the human eye can see. Submerged channels, structures, and foundations hint at temples long claimed by water, indicating complex urban or religious planning. These discoveries remind us that what lies beneath the Gulf of Cambay is not a random collection of objects, but a carefully constructed spiritual landscape, meticulously designed and slowly reclaimed by nature. As the tides shift and sunlight glints through the water, the idols cast faint shadows over the sand, a visual echo of human devotion and divine presence. They remind us of the fragility of life, the permanence of art, and the enduring power of belief. Even in silence they speak, not in words but in form, presence, and continuity. They are as much witnesses as they are artifacts, observers of centuries, narrators of rituals, and embodiments of a vanished world. The Gulf of Cambay and its submerged idols serve as a meditation on time, faith, and preservation. They bridge the gap between the past and present, between human intention and natural reclamation. They invite us to slow down, to reflect, and to imagine a world where devotion was expressed, not in fleeting gestures but in carefully crafted figures meant to endure. Even beneath waves, to encounter these submerged priests and idols is to encounter patience itself, the slow accumulation of centuries, and the resilience of human devotion. Their silent presence underlines a truth as ancient as civilization, that even when empires fall, when temples sink, and when landscapes change, the echoes of belief, artistry, and humanity persist. In the stillness of the Gulf of Cambay, with water flowing gently around them, the idols remain eternal. They are a testament to faith, to survival, and to the inexorable link between humans and the divine. As long as they lie beneath the waves, they continue their silent ritual, a ceremony that has no beginning and no end, waiting only for those who will come, observe, and remember. And so, the idols rest, beneath sediment, beneath tides, beneath centuries of quiet reflection. They are frozen in time, yet alive with the energy of human devotion, artistry, and faith. Every line carved by hand, every gesture preserved beneath the waves, speaks of a world that once was, a faith that once flourished, and a story that continues to unfold silently beneath the waters of the Gulf of Cambay. Thank you for joining us on this journey through sunken mysteries. If you enjoyed exploring these secrets, please subscribe and like, and let us know where you're watching from and the time there. Stay curious, and until next time, the depths are waiting.